This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to find out how you can volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Enchanted Castle by Edith Nesbit. Recorded by Peter Eastman. Chapter 8. It was but too plain. The unfortunate bailiff must have opened the door before the spell had faded, while yet the ugly wugglies were something more than mere coats and hats and sticks. They had rushed out upon him, and had done this. He lay there insensible. Was it a golf club or a hockey stick that had made that horrible cut on his forehead, Gerald wondered. The girls had rushed to the sufferer. Already his head was in Mabel's lap. Kathleen had tried to get it onto hers, but Mabel was too quick for her. Jimmy and Gerald both knew what was the first thing needed by the unconscious, even before Mabel impatiently said, "Water! Water!" "What in?" Jimmy asked, looking doubtfully at his hands, and then down the green slope to the marble-bordered pool where the water lilies were. "Your hat! Anything!" said Mabel. The two boys turned away. "Suppose they come after us," said Jimmy. "What come after us?" Gerald snapped rather than asked. "The ugly wugglies," Jimmy whispered. "Who's afraid?" Gerald inquired. But he looked to left and right very carefully, and chose the way that did not lead near the bushes. He scooped water up in his straw hat, and returned to Flora's temple, carrying it carefully in both hands. When he saw how quickly it ran through the straw, he pulled his handkerchief from his breast pocket with his teeth, and dropped it into the hat. It was with this that the girls wiped the blood from the bailiff's brow. "We ought to have smelling salts," said Kathleen, half in tears. "I know we ought." "They would be good," Mabel owned. "Hasn't your aunt any?" "Yes, but—" "Don't be a coward," said Gerald. "Think of last night. They wouldn't hurt you. He must have insulted them or something. Look here, you run. We'll see that nothing runs after you." There was no choice but to relinquish the head of the interesting invalid to Kathleen. So Mabel did it, cast one glaring glance round the rhododendron-bordered slope, and fled towards the castle. The other three bent over the still unconscious bailiff. "He's not dead, is he?" asked Jimmy anxiously. "No," Kathleen reassured him. "His heart's beating. Mabel and I felt it in his wrist, where doctors do. How frightfully good-looking he is." "Not so dusty," Gerald admitted. "I never know what you mean by good-looking," said Jimmy. And suddenly a shadow fell on the marble beside them, and a fourth voice spoke. Not Mabel's. Her hurrying figure, though still in sight, was far away. "Quite a personable young man," it said. The children looked up, into the face of the eldest of the ugly wugglies, the respectable one. Jimmy and Kathleen screamed. I am sorry, but they did. "Hush!" said Gerald savagely. He was still wearing the ring. "Hold your tongues, I'll get him away," he added in a whisper. "Very sad affair, this," said the respectable ugly wuggly. He spoke with a curious accent. There was something odd about his R's, and his M's and N's were those of a person laboring under an almost intolerable cold in the head. But it was not the dreadful ooh and ah voice of the night before. Kathleen and Jimmy stooped over the bailiff. Even that prostrate form, being human, seemed some little protection. But Gerald, strong in the fearlessness that the ring gave to its wearer, looked full into the face of the Ugly Wuggly, and started. For though the face was almost the same as the face he had himself painted on the school drawing paper, it was not the same, for it was no longer paper. It was a real face, and the hands, lean and almost transparent as they were real hands. As it moved a little to get a better view of the bailiff, it was plain that it had legs, arms, live legs and arms, and a self-supporting backbone. It was alive indeed, with a vengeance. "How did it happen?" Gerald asked, with an effort of calmness. A successful effort. "Most regrettable," said the Ugly Wuggly. "The others must have missed the way last night in the passage. They never found the hotel." "Did you?" asked Gerald blankly. "Of course," said the Ugly Wuggly. "Most respectable, exactly as you said. Then, when I came away, I didn't come the front way, because I wanted to revisit the Sylvan scene by daylight, and the hotel people didn't seem to know how to direct me to it. I found the others all at this door, very angry. They'd been here all night, trying to get out. Then the door opened. This gentleman must have opened it, and before I could protect him, that underbred man in the high hat, you remember." Gerald remembered. "Hit him on the head, and he fell where you see him. The others dispersed, and I myself was just going for assistance when I saw you." Here Jimmy was discovered to be in tears, and Kathleen white as any drawing paper. "What's the matter, my little man?" said the respectable Ugly Wuggly kindly. Jimmy passed instantly from tears to yells. "Here, take the ring," said Gerald in a furious whisper, and thrust it onto Jimmy's hot, damp, resisting finger. Jimmy's voice stopped short in the middle of a howl, and Gerald, in a cold flash, realized what it was that Mabel had gone through the night before. But it was daylight, and Gerald was not a coward. "We must find the others," he said. "I imagine," said the elderly Ugly Wuggly, "that they have gone to bathe. Their clothes are in the wood." He pointed stiffly. "You two go and see," said Gerald. "I'll go on dabbing this chap's head." In the wood, Jimmy, now fearless as any lion, discovered 4 heaps of clothing, with broomsticks, hockey sticks, and masks complete. All that had gone to make up the gentlemen Ugly Wugglies of the night before. On a stone seat, well in the sun, sat the 2 lady Ugly Wugglies, and Kathleen approached them gingerly. Valor is easier in the sunshine than at night, as we all know. When she and Jimmy came close to the bench, they saw that the Ugly Wugglies were only Ugly Wugglies, such as they had often made. There was no life in them. Jimmy shook them to pieces, and a sigh of relief burst from Kathleen. "The spell's broken, you see," she said. "And that old gentleman, he's real. He only happens to be like the Ugly Wuggly we made." "He's got the coat that hung in the hall on anyway," said Jimmy. "No, it's only like it. Let's get back to the unconscious stranger." They did, and Gerald begged the elderly Ugly Wuggly to retire among the bushes with Jimmy. "Because," said he, "I think the poor bailiff's coming round, and it might upset him to see strangers. And Jimmy'll keep you company. He's the best one of us to go with you," he added hastily. And this, since Jimmy had the ring, was certainly true. So the two disappeared behind the rhododendrons. Mabel came back with the salts just as the bailiff opened his eyes. "It's just like life," she said. "I might just as well not have gone. However—" She knelt down at once and held the bottle under the sufferer's nose till he sneezed, and feebly pushed her hand away with the faint question, "What's up now?" "You've hurt your head," said Gerald. "Lie still." "No more smelling bottle," he said weakly, and lay. Quite soon he sat up and looked round him. There was an anxious silence. Here was a grown-up who knew last night's secret, and none of the children were at all sure what the utmost rigor of the law might be in a case where people, no matter how young, made ugly-wugglies and brought them to life. Dangerous, fighting, angry life. What would he say? What would he do? He said, "What an odd thing. Have I been insensible long?" "Hours," said Mabel earnestly. "Not long," said Kathleen. "We don't know. We found you like it," said Gerald. "I'm all right now," said the bailiff, and his eye fell on the blood-stained handkerchief. "I say, I did give my head a bang, and you've been giving me first aid. Thank you most awfully. But it is rum." "What's rum?" politeness obliged Gerald to ask. "Well, I suppose it isn't really rum. I expect I saw you just before I fainted, or whatever it was. But I've dreamed the most extraordinary dream while I've been insensible, and you were in it." "Nothing but us?" asked Mabel breathlessly. "Oh, lots of things. Impossible things. But you were real enough." Everyone breathed deeply in relief. It was, as they agreed later, a lucky let-off. "Are you sure you're all right?" they all asked as he got on his feet. "Perfectly, thank you." He glanced behind Flora's statue as he spoke. "Do you know, I dreamed there was a door there. But of course there isn't. I don't know how to thank you," he added, looking at them with what the girls called his beautiful, kind eyes. "It's lucky for me you came along. You come here whenever you like, you know," he added. "I give you the freedom of the place." "You're the new bailiff, aren't you?" said Mabel. "Yes. How did you know?" he asked quickly. But they did not tell him how they knew. Instead, they found out which way he was going, and went the other way, after warm handshakes, and hopes on both sides that they would meet again soon. "I'll tell you what," said Gerald, as they watched the tall, broad figure of the bailiff grow smaller across the hot green of the grass slope. "Have you got any idea of how we're going to spend the day? Because I have." The others hadn't. "We'll get rid of that ugly-wugly. Oh, we'll find a way, right enough. And directly we've done it, we'll go home and seal up the ring in an envelope so that its teeth'll be drawn and it'll be powerless to have unforeseen larks with us. Then we'll get out on the roof and have a quiet day. Books and apples. I'm about fed up with adventures, so I tell you." The others told him the same thing. "Now, think," said he. "Think as you've never thought before. How to get rid of that ugly-wugly." Everyone thought. But their brains were tired with anxiety and distress, and the thoughts they thought were, as Mabel said, not worth thinking, let alone saying. "I suppose Jimmy's all right," said Kathleen anxiously. "Oh, he's all right. He's got the ring," said Gerald. I hope he won't go wishing anything rotten, said Mabel. But Gerald urged her to shut up and let him think. I think best sitting down, he said, and sat. And sometimes you can think best aloud. The Ugly Wuggly's real. Don't make any mistake about that. And he got made real inside that passage. If we could get him back there, he might get changed again, and then we could take the coats and things back. Isn't there any other way? Kathleen asked. And Mabel, more candid, said bluntly, I'm not going into that passage, so there. Afraid, in broad daylight, Gerald sneered. It wouldn't be broad daylight in there, said Mabel, and Kathleen shivered. If we went to him and suddenly tore his coat off, said she. He is only coats. He couldn't go on being real then. Couldn't he? Said Gerald. You don't know what he's like under the coat. Kathleen shivered again. And all this time the sun was shining gaily, and the white statues and the green trees and the fountains and terraces looked as cheerfully romantic as a scene in a play. Anyway, said Gerald, we'll try to get him back and shut the door. That's the most we can hope for. And then Apples and Robinson Crusoe, or The Swiss Family, or any book you like that's got no magic in it. Now, we've just got to do it. And he's not horrid now. Really he isn't. He's real, you see. I suppose that makes all the difference, said Mabel, and tried to feel that perhaps it did. And it's broad daylight. Just look at the sun, Gerald insisted. Come on. He took a hand of each, and they walked resolutely towards the bank of rhododendrons, behind which Jimmy and the Ugly Wuggly had been told to wait. And as they went, Gerald said, He's real. The sun's shining. It'll all be over in a minute. And he said these things again and again, so that there should be no mistake about them. As they neared the bushes, the shining leaves rustled, shivered, and parted, and before the girls had time to begin to hang back, Jimmy came blinking out into the sunlight. The boughs closed behind him, and they did not stir or rustle for the appearance of anyone else. Jimmy was alone. Where is it? Asked the girls in one breath. Walking up and down in a fir walk, said Jimmy, doing sums in a book. He says he's most frightfully rich, and he's got to get up to town, to the stocks or something, where they change papers into gold if you're clever, he says. I should like to go to the stocks change, wouldn't you? I don't seem to care very much about changes, said Gerald. I've had enough. Show us where he is. We must get rid of him. He's got a motor car, Jimmy went on, parting the warm, varnished-looking rhododendron leaves, and a garden with a tennis court, and a lake, and a carriage and pair. And he goes to Athens for his holiday sometimes, just like other people go to Margate. The best thing, said Gerald, following through the bushes, will be to tell him the shortest way out is through that hotel that he thinks he found last night. Then we get him into the passage, give him a push, fly back and shut the door. He'll starve to death in there, said Kathleen, if he's really real. I expect it doesn't last long. The ring magics don't. Anyway, it's the only thing I can think of. He's frightfully rich, Jimmy went on, unheeding amid the cracking of the bushes. He's building a public library for the people where he lives, and having his portrait painted to put in it. He thinks they'll like that. The belt of rhododendrons was past, and the children had reached a smooth grass walk, bordered by tall pines and firs of strange, different kinds. He's just round that corner, said Jimmy. He's simply rolling in money. He doesn't know what to do with it. He's been building a horse trough and drinking fountain with a bust of himself on top. Why doesn't he build a private swimming bath close to his bed so that he can just roll off into it of a morning? I wish I was rich. I'd soon show him." "That's a sensible wish," said Gerald. "I wonder we didn't think of doing that." "Oh, crikey!" he added, and with reason. For there, in the green shadows of the pine walk, in the woodland silence, broken only by rustling leaves and the agitated breathing of the 3 unhappy others, Jimmy got his wish. By quick but perfectly plain-to-be-seen degrees, Jimmy became rich. And the horrible thing was that, though they could see it happening, they did not know what was happening, and could not have stopped it if they had. All they could see was Jimmy, their own Jimmy, whom they had larked with and quarreled with and made it up with ever since they could remember. Jimmy continuously and horribly growing old. The whole thing was over in a few seconds. Yet, in those few seconds, they saw him grow to a youth, a young man, a middle-aged man, and then, with a sort of shivering shock, unspeakably horrible and definite, he seemed to settle down into an elderly gentleman, handsomely but rather dowdily dressed, who was looking down at them through spectacles, and asking them the nearest way to the railway station. If they had not seen the change take place in all its awful details, they would never have guessed that the stout, prosperous, elderly gentleman with the high hat, the frock coat, and the large red seal dangling from the curve of a portly waistcoat was their own Jimmy. But, as they had seen it, they knew the dreadful truth. "Oh, Jimmy, don't!" cried Mabel desperately. Gerald said, "This is perfectly beastly," and Kathleen broke into wild weeping. "Don't cry, little girl," said that which had been Jimmy. "And you, boy, can't you give a civil answer to a civil question?" "He doesn't know us," wailed Kathleen. "Who doesn't know you?" said that which had been impatiently. "You don't," Kathleen sobbed. "I certainly don't," returned that which, "but surely that need not distress you so deeply." "Oh, Jimmy, Jimmy, Jimmy!" Kathleen sobbed louder than before. "He doesn't know us," Gerald owned. "Or, look here, Jimmy, you aren't kidding, are you? Because if you are, it's simply abject rot." "My name is Mr. said that which had been Jimmy, and gave the name correctly. By the way, it will perhaps be shorter to call this elderly stout person, who was Jimmy grown rich, by some simpler name than I have just used. Let us call him That, short for that which had been Jimmy. "What are we to do?" whispered Mabel, awestruck. And aloud she said, "Oh, Mr. James, or whatever you call yourself, do give me the ring." For on That's finger the fatal ring showed plain. "Certainly not," said That firmly. "You appear to be a very grasping child." "But what are you going to do?" Gerald asked, in the flat tones of complete hopelessness. "Your interest is very flattering," said That. "Will you tell me, or won't you, the way to the nearest railway station?" "No," said Gerald, "we won't." "Then," said That, still politely, though quite plainly furious, "perhaps you'll tell me the way to the nearest lunatic asylum." "Oh, no, no, no!" cried Kathleen. "You're not so bad as that." "Perhaps not, but you are," That retorted. "If you're not lunatics, you're idiots. However, I see a gentleman ahead who is perhaps sane. In fact, I seem to recognize him." A gentleman, indeed, was now to be seen approaching. It was the elderly Ugly Wuggly.
remember Jerry,"
Kathleen cried.
"and Kathy, your own Kathy Pusscat. Dear, dear Jimmy, don't be so silly."
"Little girl," said that, looking at her crossly through his spectacles, "I am sorry you have not been better brought up." And he walked stiffly towards the Ugly Wuggly. 2 hats were raised, a few words were exchanged, and 2 elderly figures walked side by side down the green pine walk, followed by 3 miserable children, horrified, bewildered, alarmed, and what is really worse than anything, quite at their wits' end. "He wished to be rich, so of course he is," said Gerald. "He'll have money for tickets and everything."
"And when the spell breaks, it's sure to break, isn't it? He'll find himself somewhere awful, perhaps in a really good hotel, and not know how he got there. I wonder how long the Ugly Wugglies lasted,"
said Mabel. "Yes," Gerald answered. "That reminds me. You 2 must collect the coats and things. Hide them anywhere you like, and we'll carry them home tomorrow. If there is any tomorrow," he added darkly.
"Oh, don't,"
said Kathleen, once more breathing heavily, on the verge of tears.
"You wouldn't think everything could be so awful, and the sun shining like it does."
"Look here," said Gerald. "Of course I must stick to Jimmy. You 2 must go home to Mademoiselle and tell her Jimmy and I have gone off in the train with a gentleman. Say he looked like an uncle. He does, some kind of uncle. There'll be a beastly row afterwards, but it's got to be done."
"It all seems thick with lies,"
said Kathleen.
"You don't seem to be able to get a word of truth in edgewise, hardly."
"Don't you worry," said her brother. "They aren't lies. They're as true as anything else in this magic rot we've got mixed up in. It's like telling lies in a dream. You can't help it."
"Well, all I know is I wish it would stop."
"Lot of use your wishing that is," said Gerald, exasperated. "So long. I've got to go. And you've got to stay. If it's any comfort to you, I don't believe any of it's real. It can't be. It's too thick. Tell Mademoiselle Jimmy and I will be back to tea. If we don't happen to be, I can't help it. I can't help anything, except perhaps Jimmy." He started to run, for the girls had lagged, and the Ugly Wuggly and that, late Jimmy, had quickened their pace. The girls were left looking after them.
"We've got to find these clothes,"
said Mabel.
"Simply got to. I used to want to be a heroine. It's different when it really comes to being, isn't it?" "Yes, very,"
said Kathleen.
"Where shall we hide the clothes when we've got them? Not that passage."
"Never," said Mabel firmly.
"We'll hide them inside the great stone dinosaurus. He's hollow." "He comes alive in a stone,"
said Kathleen.
"Not in the sunshine he doesn't,"
Mabel told her confidently.
"and not without the ring." "There won't be any apples and books today,"
said Kathleen.
"No, but we'll do the babiest thing we can do the minute we get home. We'll have a doll's tea party. That'll make us feel as if there wasn't really any magic." "It'll have to be a very strong tea party then,"
said Kathleen doubtfully. And now we see Gerald, a small but quite determined figure, paddling along in the soft white dust of the sunny road, in the wake of 2 elderly gentlemen. His hand in his trousers pocket buries itself with a feeling of satisfaction in the heavy mixed coinage that is his share of the profits of his conjuring at the fair. His noiseless tennis shoes bear him to the station, where, unobserved, he listens at the ticket office to the voice of that which was James. "1 First London," it says, and Gerald, waiting till that and the Ugly Wuggly have strolled onto the platform, politely conversing of politics and the Kaffir market, takes a third return to London. The train strides in, squeaking and puffing. The watched take their seats in a carriage blue-lined. The watcher springs into a yellow wooden compartment. A whistle sounds, a flag is waved. The train pulls itself together, strains, jerks, and starts. "I don't understand," says Gerald, alone in his third-class carriage, "how railway trains and magic can go on at the same time." And yet, they do. Mabel and Kathleen, nervously peering among the rhododendron bushes and the bracken and the fancy fir trees, find several heaps of coats, hats, skirts, gloves, golf clubs, hockey sticks, broom handles. They carry them, panting and damp, for the midday sun is pitiless, up the hill to where the stone dinosaurus looms immense among a forest of larches. The dinosaurus has a hole in his stomach. Kathleen shows Mabel how to make a back, and climbs up on it, into the cold, stony inside of the monster. Mabel hands up the clothes and the sticks.
"There's lots of room," says Kathleen. "Its tail goes down into the ground. It's like a secret passage." "Suppose something comes out of it and jumps out at you,"
says Mabel, and Kathleen hurriedly descends. The explanations to Mademoiselle promised to be difficult, but, as Kathleen said afterwards, any little thing is enough to take a grown-up's attention off. A figure passes the window, just as they are explaining that it really did look exactly like an uncle that the boys have gone to London with. "Who's that?" says Mademoiselle suddenly, pointing to, which everyone knows is not manners. It is the bailiff coming back from the doctor's, with antiseptic plaster on that nasty cut that took so long a bathing this morning. They tell her it is the bailiff at Yalding Towers, and she says, "Ciel," sky, and asks no more awkward questions about the boys. Lunch, very late, is a silent meal. After lunch, Mademoiselle goes out, in a hat with many pink roses, carrying a rose-lined parasol. The girls, in dead silence, organize a doll's tea party with real tea. At the second cup, Kathleen bursts into tears. Mabel, also weeping, embraces her.
"I wish,"
sobs Kathleen.
"Oh, I do wish I knew where the boys were. It would be such a comfort."
Gerald knew where the boys were, and it was no comfort to him at all. If you come to think of it, he was the only person who could know where they were, because Jimmy didn't know that he was a boy, and indeed he wasn't really. And the Ugly Wuggly couldn't be expected to know anything real, such as where boys were. At the moment when the second cup of doll's tea, very strong, but not strong enough to drown care in, was being poured out by the trembling hand of Kathleen, Gerald was lurking, there really is no other word for it, on the staircase of Aldermanbury Buildings, Old Broad Street. On the floor below him was a door bearing the legend, Mr. U. W. Ugly, Stock and Share Broker, and at the Stock Exchange. And on the floor above was another door, on which was the name of Gerald's little brother, now grown suddenly rich in so magic and tragic a way. There were no explaining words under Jimmy's name. Gerald could not guess what walk in life it was to which that, which had been Jimmy, owed its affluence. He had seen, when the door opened to admit his brother, a tangle of clerks and mahogany desks. Evidently, that had a large business. What was Gerald to do? What could he do? It is almost impossible, especially for one so young as Gerald, to enter a large London office and explain that the elderly and respected head of it is not what he seems, but is really your little brother who has been suddenly advanced to age and wealth by a tricky wishing ring. If you think it's a possible thing, try it, that's all. Nor could he knock at the door of Mr. U.W. Ugly, stock and share broker, and at the stock exchange, and inform his clerks that their chief was really nothing but old clothes that had accidentally come alive, and by some magic which he couldn't attempt to explain, become real during a night spent at a really good hotel which had no existence. The situation bristled, as you see, with difficulties, and it was so long past Gerald's proper dinner time that his increasing hunger was rapidly growing to seem the most important difficulty of all. It is quite possible to starve to death on the staircase of a London building, if the people you are watching for only stay long enough in their offices. The truth of this came home to Gerald more and more painfully. A boy with hair like a new front doormat came whistling up the stairs. He had a dark blue bag in his hands. "I'll give you a tanner for yourself if you'll get me a tanner's worth of buns," said Gerald, with that prompt decision common to all great commanders. "Show us your tanners," the boy rejoined, with at least equal promptness. Gerald showed them. "All right, hand over." "Payment on delivery," said Gerald, using words from the drapers, which he had never thought to use. The boy grinned admiringly. "Knows his way about," he said. "Ain't no flies on him." "Not many," Gerald owned with modest pride. "Cut along, there's a good chap. I've got to wait here. I'll take care of your bag if you like." "Nor yet there ain't no flies on me neither," remarked the boy, shouldering it. "I been up to the confidence trick for years, ever since I was your age." With this parting shot he went, and returned in due course, bun-laden. Gerald gave the sixpence, and took the buns. When the boy, a minute later, emerged from the door of Mr. U.W. Ugly, stock and share broker, and at the stock exchange, Gerald stopped him. "What sort of chap's that?" he asked, pointing the question with a jerk of an explaining thumb. "Awful big pot," said the boy, "up to his eyes in oof, motor and all that." "Know anything about the one on the next landing?" "He's bigger than what this one is. Very old firm. Special cellar in the Bank of England to put his chink in. All in bins, like against the wall at the corn chandler's. Jiminy, I wouldn't mind half an hour in there, and the doors open and the police away at a beano. Not much, neither. You'll bust if you eat all them buns." "Have one?" Gerald responded, and held out the bag. "They say in our office," said the boy, paying for the bun honorably, with unasked information, "as these two is all for cutting each other's throats. Oh, only in the way of business. Been at it for years." Gerald wildly wondered what magic, and how much, had been needed to give history and a past to these two things of yesterday, the rich Jimmy and the ugly Wuggly. If he could get them away, would all memory of them fade? In this boy's mind, for instance, in the minds of all the people who did business with them in the city? Would the mahogany and clerk-furnished offices fade away? Were the clerks real? Was the mahogany? Was he himself real? Was the boy? Can you keep a secret? He asked the other boy. Are you on for a lark? I ought to be getting back to the office, said the boy. Get then, said Gerald. Don't you get stuffy, said the boy. I was just going to say it didn't matter. I know how to make my nose bleed if I'm a bit late. Gerald congratulated him on this accomplishment, at once so useful and so graceful, and then said, Look here, I'll give you 5 bob, honest. What for? Was the boy's natural question. If you'll help me. Fire ahead. I'm a private inquiry, said Gerald. Heck, you don't look it. What's the good of being one if you look it? Gerald asked impatiently, beginning on another bun. That old chap on the floor above, he's wanted. Police? Asked the boy with fine carelessness. No, sorrowing relations. Return to, said the boy. All forgotten and forgiven, I see. And I've got to get him to them somehow. Now, if you could go in and give him a message from someone who wanted to meet him on business. Hold on, said the boy. I know a trick worth 2 of that. You go in and see old Ugly. He'd give his ears to have the old boy out of the way for a day or 2. They were saying so in our office only this morning. Let me think, said Gerald, laying down the last bun on his knee expressly to hold his head in his hands. Don't you forget to think about my 5 bob, said the boy. Then there was a silence on the stairs, broken only by the cough of a clerk in that's office, and the clickety-clack of a typewriter in the office of Mr. U.W. Ugly. Then Gerald rose up and finished the bun. You're right, he said. I'll chance it. Here's your 5 bob. He brushed the bun crumbs from his front, cleared his throat, and knocked at the door of Mr. U.W. Ugly. It opened, and he entered. The doormat boy lingered, secure in his power to account for his long absence by means of his well-trained nose, and his waiting was rewarded. He went down a few steps, round the bend of the stairs, and heard the voice of Mr. U.W. Ugly, so well known on that staircase, and on the stock exchange, say in soft, cautious accents. Then I'll ask him to let me look at the ring, and I'll drop it. You pick it up. But remember, it's a pure accident, and you don't know me. I can't have my name mixed up in a thing like this. You're sure he's really unhinged? Quite, said Gerald. He's quite mad about that ring. He'll follow it anywhere, I know he will. And think of his sorrowing relations. I do, said Mr. Ugly kindly. That's all I do think of course. He went up the stairs to the other office, and Gerald heard the voice of that telling his clerks that he was going out to lunch. Then the horrible Ugly Wuggly, and Jimmy, hardly less horrible in the eyes of Gerald, passed down the stairs, where in the dusk of the lower landing 2 boys were making themselves as undistinguishable as possible, and so out into the street, talking of stocks and shares, bears and bulls. The 2 boys followed. I say, the doormat-headed boy whispered admiringly, whatever are you up to? You'll see, said Gerald recklessly. Come on. You tell me. I must be getting back. Well, I'll tell you, but you won't believe me. That old gentleman's not really old at all. He's my young brother, suddenly turned into what you see. The other's not real at all. He's only just old clothes and nothing inside. He looks it, I must say, the boy admitted. But I say, you do stick it on, don't you? Well, my brother was turned like that by a magic ring, "There ain't no such thing as magic," said the boy. "I learnt that at school." "All right," said Gerald. "Goodbye." "Oh, go ahead," said the boy. "You do stick it on, though." "Well, that magic ring. If I can get hold of it, I shall just wish we were all in a certain place, and we shall be, and then I can deal with both of them." "Deal?" "Yes, the ring won't unwish anything you've wished. That undoes itself with time, like a spring uncoiling. But it'll give you a brand new wish. I'm almost certain of it. Anyhow, I'm going to chance it." "You are a rotter, aren't you?" said the boy respectfully. "You wait and see," Gerald repeated. "I say, you aren't going into this swell place. You can't." The boy paused, appalled at the majesty of Pym's. "Yes, I am. They can't turn us out as long as we behave. You come along, too. I'll stand lunch." I don't know why Gerald clung so to this boy. He wasn't a very nice boy. Perhaps it was because he was the only person Gerald knew in London to speak to, except that which had been Jimmy and the Ugly Wuggly, and he did not want to talk to either of them. What happened next happened so quickly that, as Gerald said later, it was just like magic. The restaurant was crowded. Busy men were hastily bolting the food, hurriedly brought by busy waitresses. There was a clink of forks and plates, the gurgle of beer from bottles, the hum of talk, and the smell of many good things to eat. "2 chops, please," Gerald had just said, playing with a plainly shown handful of money, so as to leave no doubt of his honorable intentions. Then, at the next table, he heard the words, "Ah, yes, curious old family heirloom." The ring was drawn off the finger of that, and Mr. U.W. Ugly, murmuring something about a unique curio, reached his impossible hand out for it. The doormat-headed boy was watching breathlessly. "There's a ring right enough," he owned. And then the ring slipped from the hand of Mr. U.W. Ugly and skidded along the floor. Gerald pounced on it like a greyhound on a hare. He thrust the dull circlet on his finger and cried out aloud in that crowded place, "I wish Jimmy and I were inside that door behind the statue of Flora." It was the only safe place he could think of. The lights and sounds and scents of the restaurant died away, as a wax drop dies in fire, a raindrop in water. I don't know, and Gerald never knew, what happened in that restaurant. There was nothing about it in the papers, though Gerald looked anxiously for "extraordinary disappearance of well-known city man." What the doormat-headed boy did or thought, I don't know either. No more does Gerald. But he would like to know, whereas I don't care tuppence. The world went on all right anyhow, whatever he thought or did. The lights and the sounds and the scents of Pym's died out. In place of the light, there was darkness. In place of the sounds, there was silence. And in place of the scent of beef, pork, mutton, fish, veal, cabbage, onions, carrots, beer, and tobacco, there was the musty, damp scent of a place underground that has been long shut up. Gerald felt sick and giddy, and there was something at the back of his mind that he knew would make him feel sicker and giddier as soon as he should have the sense to remember what it was. Meantime, it was important to think of proper words to soothe the city man that had once been Jimmy, to keep him quiet, till time, like a spring uncoiling, should bring the reversal of the spell, make all things as they were and as they ought to be. But he fought in vain for words. There were none. nor were they needed, for through the deep darkness came a voice, and it was not the voice of that city man who had been Jimmy, but the voice of that very Jimmy who was Gerald's little brother, and who had wished that unlucky wish for riches that could only be answered by changing all that was Jimmy, young and poor, to all that Jimmy, rich and old, would have been. Another voice said,
Jerry, are you awake? I've had such a rum dream.
And then there was a moment when nothing was said or done. Gerald felt through the thick darkness, and the thick silence, and the thick scent of old earth shut up, and he got hold of Jimmy's hand. "It's all right, Jimmy, old chap," he said. "It's not a dream now. It's that beastly ring again. I had to wish us here to get you back at all out of your dream."
"Wish us where?"
Jimmy held on to the hand in a way that in the daylight of life he would have been the first to call babyish. "Inside the passage, behind the Flora statue," said Gerald, adding, "It's all right, really."
"Oh, I dare say it's all right,"
Jimmy answered through the dark, with an irritation not strong enough to make him loosen his hold of his brother's hand.
"But how are we going to get out?"
Then Gerald knew what it was that was waiting to make him feel more giddy than the lightning flight from Cheapside to Yalding Towers had been able to make him. But he said stoutly, "I'll wish us out, of course," though all the time he knew that the ring would not undo its given wishes. It didn't. Gerald wished. He handed the ring carefully to Jimmy through the thick darkness, and Jimmy wished. And there they still were, in that black passage behind Flora, that had led, in the case of one Ugly Wuggly at least, to a good hotel. And the stone door was shut, and they did not know even which way to turn to it. "If I only had some matches," said Gerald.
"Why didn't you leave me in the dream?"
Jimmy almost whimpered.
"It was light there, and I was just going to have salmon and cucumber."
"I," rejoined Gerald in gloom, "was just going to have steak and fried potatoes." The silence and the darkness and the earthy scent were all they had now.
"I always wondered what it would be like,"
said Jimmy in low, even tones,
"to be buried alive, and now I know." "Oh!"
His voice suddenly rose to a shriek.
"It isn't true! It isn't! It's a dream, that's what it is!"
There was a pause while you could have counted 10. Then, "Yes," said Gerald bravely, through the scent and the silence and the darkness. "It's just a dream, Jimmy, old chap. We'll just hold on and call out now and then just for the lark of the thing. But it's really only a dream, of course."
"Of course,"
said Jimmy, in the silence and the darkness and the scent of old earth. End of Chapter 8. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to find out how you can volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Enchanted Castle by Edith Nesbit. Recorded by Peter Eastman. Chapter 9. There is a curtain, thin as gossamer, clear as glass, strong as iron, that hangs forever between the world of magic and the world that seems to us to be real. And when once people have found one of the little weak spots in that curtain, which are marked by magic rings and amulets and the like, almost anything may happen. Thus, it is not surprising that Mabel and Kathleen, conscientiously conducting one of the dullest dolls' tea parties at which either had ever assisted, should suddenly, and both at once, have felt a strange, unreasonable, but quite irresistible desire to return instantly to the Temple of Flora, even at the cost of leaving the dolls' tea service in an unwashed state, and only half the raisins eaten. They went, as one has to go when the magic impulse drives one, against their better judgment, against their wills almost. And the nearer they came to the Temple of Flora, in the golden hush of the afternoon, the more certain each was that they could not possibly have done otherwise. And this explains exactly how it was that when Gerald and Jimmy, holding hands in the darkness of the passage, uttered their first concerted yell, just for the lark of the thing, that yell was instantly answered from outside. A crack of light showed in that part of the passage where they had least expected the door to be. The stone door itself swung slowly open, and they were out of it, in the Temple of Flora, blinking in the good daylight, an unresisting prey to Kathleen's embraces and the questionings of Mabel.
"And you left that ugly wuggly loose in London,"
Mabel pointed out.
"You might have wished it to be with you, too."
"It's all right where it is," said Gerald. "I couldn't think of everything. And besides, no thank you. Now we'll go home and seal up the ring in an envelope."
"I haven't done anything with the ring yet,"
said Kathleen. "I shouldn't think you'd want to when you see the sort of things it does with you," said Gerald.
"It wouldn't do things like that if I was wishing with it,"
Kathleen protested.
"Look here,"
said Mabel.
"let's just put it back in the treasure room and have done with it. I oughtn't ever to have taken it away, really. It's a sort of stealing. It's quite as bad, really, as Eliza borrowing it to astonish her gentleman friend with."
"I don't mind putting it back if you like," said Gerald. "Only, if any of us do think of a sensible wish, you'll let us have it out again, of course?"
Of course,"
Mabel agreed. So they trooped up to the castle, and Mabel once more worked the spring that let down the paneling and showed the jewels, and the ring was put back among the odd, dull ornaments that Mabel had once said were magic. "How innocent it looks," said Gerald. "You wouldn't think there was any magic about it. It's just like an old, silly ring. I wonder if what Mabel said about the other things is true. Suppose we try."
"Don't,"
said Kathleen.
"I think magic things are spiteful. They just enjoy getting you into tight places." "I'd like to try," said Mabel, "only, well, everything's been rather upsetting, and I've forgotten what I said anything was."
So had the others. Perhaps that was why, when Gerald said that a bronze buckle laid on the foot would have the effect of 7-league boots, it didn't. When Jimmy, a little of the city man he had been clinging to him still, said that the steel collar would ensure you're always having money in your pockets, his own remained empty. And when Mabel and Kathleen invented qualities of the most delightful nature for various rings and chains and brooches, nothing at all happened.
"It's only the ring that's magic,"
said Mabel at last.
"And, I say,"
she added in quite a different voice. What?
Suppose even the ring isn't.
But we know it is.
I don't,
said Mabel.
I believe it's not today at all. I believe it's the other day. We've just dreamed all these things. It's the day I made up that nonsense about the ring.
No, it isn't, said Gerald. You were in your princess clothes then.
What princess clothes?
said Mabel, opening her dark eyes very wide. Oh, don't be silly, said Gerald wearily.
I'm not silly, said Mabel. I think it's time you went. I'm sure Jimmy wants his tea.
Of course I do, said Jimmy, but you had got the princess clothes that day. Come along, let's shut up the shutters and leave the ring in its long home.
What ring?
said Mabel. Don't take any notice of her, said Gerald. She's only trying to be funny.
No, I'm not, said Mabel, but I'm inspired, like a python or a Sibylline lady. What ring?
The wishing ring, said Kathleen. The invisibility ring.
Don't you see now?
said Mabel, her eyes wider than ever.
The ring's what you say it is. That's how it came to make us invisible. I just said it. Oh, we can't leave it here, if that's what it is. It isn't stealing, really, when it's as valuable as that, you see. Say what it is.
It's a wishing ring, said Jimmy.
We've had that before, and you had your silly wish,
said Mabel, more and more excited.
I say it isn't a wishing ring. I say it's a ring that makes the wearer 4 yards high.
She had caught up the ring as she spoke, and even as she spoke, the ring showed high above the children's heads, on the finger of an impossible Mabel, who was, indeed, 12 feet high. Now you've done it, said Gerald, and he was right. It was in vain that Mabel asserted that the ring was a wishing ring. It quite clearly wasn't. It was what she had said it was. And you can't tell at all how long the effect will last, said Gerald. Look at the invisibleness. This is difficult to do, but the others understood him.
It may last for days,
said Kathleen.
Oh, Mabel, it was silly of you.
That's right, rub it in, said Mabel bitterly. You should have believed me when I said it was what I said it was. Then I shouldn't have had to show you, and I shouldn't be the silly size. What am I to do now, I should like to know? We must conceal you till you get your right size again. That's all, said Gerald practically.
Yes, but where?
said Mabel, stamping a foot 24 inches long. In one of the empty rooms. You wouldn't be afraid.
Of course not,
said Mabel.
Oh, I do wish we just put the ring back and left it.
Well, it wasn't us that didn't, said Jimmy, with more truth than grammar.
I shall put it back now,
said Mabel, tugging at it. I wouldn't if I were you, said Gerald thoughtfully. You don't want to stay that length, do you? And unless the ring's on your finger when the time's up, I dare say it wouldn't act. The exalted Mabel sullenly touched the spring. The panels slowly slid into place, and all the bright jewels were hidden. Once more, the room was merely 8-sided, paneled, sunlit, and unfurnished.
Now, said Mabel, where am I to hide? It's a good thing Auntie gave me leave to stay the night with you. As it is, one of you will have to stay the night with me. I'm not going to be left alone, the silly height I am.
Height was the right word. Mabel had said 4 yards high. And she was 4 yards high. But she was hardly any thicker than when her height was 4 feet 7. And the effect was, as Gerald remarked, wonderfully worm-like. Her clothes had, of course, grown with her, and she looked like a little girl reflected in one of those long bent mirrors at Rosherville Gardens that make stout people look so happily slender, and slender people so sadly scraggy. She sat down suddenly on the floor, and it was like a fourfold foot rule folding itself up. "It's no use sitting there, girl," said Gerald.
"I'm not sitting here," retorted Mabel. "I only got down so as to be able to get through the door. It'll have to be hands and knees through most places for me now, I suppose."
"Aren't you hungry?" Jimmy asked suddenly.
"I don't know," said Mabel desolately. It's such a long way off."
"Well, I'll scout," said Gerald. "If the coast's clear—"
"Look here," said Mabel. "I think I'd rather be out of doors till it gets dark."
"You can't. Someone's certain to see you."
"Not if I go through the yew hedge," said Mabel. "There's a yew hedge with a passage along its inside, like the box hedge in The Luck of the Vales."
"In what?"
"The Luck of the Vales. It's a ripping book. It was that book first set me on to hunt for hidden doors and panels and things. If I crept along that on my front, like a serpent, it comes out amongst the rhododendrons, close by the Dinosaurus. We could camp there."
"There's tea," said Gerald, who had had no dinner.
"That's just what there isn't," said Jimmy, who had had none either. "Oh, you won't desert me," said Mabel. "Look here, I'll write to Auntie. She'll give you the things for a picnic if she's there and awake. If she isn't, one of the maids will."
So she wrote on a leaf of Gerald's invaluable pocketbook.
"Dearest Auntie, please may we have some things for a picnic? Gerald will bring them. I would come myself, but I am a little tired. I think I have been growing rather fast. Your loving niece, Mabel. P.S. Lots, please, because some of us are very hungry."
It was found difficult, but possible, for Mabel to creep along the tunnel in the yew hedge. Possible, but slow, so that the three had hardly had time to settle themselves among the rhododendrons, and to wonder bitterly what on earth Gerald was up to be such a time gone, when he returned, panting under the weight of a covered basket. He dumped it down on the fine grass carpet, groaned, and added, "But it's worth it. Where's our Mabel?" The long, pale face of Mabel peered out from rhododendron leaves very near the ground.
"I look just like anybody else like this, don't I?" she asked anxiously. "All the rest of me's miles away, under different bushes." "We've covered up the bits between the bushes with bracken and leaves," said Kathleen, avoiding the question. "Don't wriggle, Mabel, or you'll waggle them off."
Jimmy was eagerly unpacking the basket. It was a generous tea. A long loaf, butter in a cabbage leaf, a bottle of milk, a bottle of water, cake, and large, smooth, yellow gooseberries in a box that had once held an extra-sized bottle of somebody's matchless something for the hair and mustache. Mabel cautiously advanced her incredible arms from the rhododendron and leaned on one of her spindly elbows. Gerald cut bread and butter, while Kathleen obligingly ran round, at Mabel's request, to see that the green coverings had not dropped from any of the remoter parts of Mabel's person. Then there was a happy, hungry silence, broken only by those brief, impassioned suggestions natural to such an occasion.
"More cake, please."
"Milk ahoy there."
"Chuck us the goose-gogs."
Everyone grew calmer, more contented with their lot. A pleasant feeling, half tiredness and half restfulness, crept to the extremities of the party. Even the unfortunate Mabel was conscious of it in her remote feet, that lay crossed under the third rhododendron to the north-northwest of the tea party. Gerald did but voice the feelings of the others, when he said, not without regret, "Well, I'm a new man, but I couldn't eat so much as another goose-gog if you paid me."
"I could,"
said Mabel.
"Yes, I know they're all gone, and I've had my share, but I could. It's me being so long, I suppose."
A delicious after-food peace filled the summer air. At a little distance, the green lichened gray of the vast stone dinosaurus showed through the shrubs. He, too, seemed peaceful and happy. Gerald caught his stone eye through a gap in the foliage. His glance seemed somehow sympathetic. "I dare say he liked a good meal in his day," said Gerald, stretching luxuriously.
"Who did?"
"The dino what's-his-name," said Gerald.
"He had a meal today,"
said Kathleen, and giggled.
"Yes, didn't he?"
said Mabel, giggling also.
"You mustn't laugh lower than your chest,"
said Kathleen anxiously,
"or your green stuff will joggle off."
"What do you mean, a meal?" Jimmy asked suspiciously. "What are you sniggering about?"
"He had a meal, things to put in his inside,"
said Kathleen, still giggling. "Oh, be funny if you want to," said Jimmy, suddenly cross. "We don't want to know, do we, Jerry?" "I do," said Gerald witheringly. "I'm dying to know. Wake me, you girls, when you've finished pretending you're not going to tell." He tilted his hat over his eyes and lay back in the attitude of slumber.
"Oh, don't be stupid,"
said Kathleen hastily.
"It's only that we fed the dinosaurus through the hole in his stomach with the clothes the ugly wuglies were made of."
"We can take them home with us then," said Gerald, chewing the white end of a grass stalk. "So that's all right."
"Look here,"
said Kathleen suddenly.
"I've got an idea. Let me have the ring a bit. I won't say what the idea is, in case it doesn't come off, and then you'd say I was silly. I'll give it back before we go." "Oh, but you aren't going yet,"
said Mabel, pleading. She pulled off the ring.
"Of course,"
she added earnestly,
"I'm only too glad for you to try any idea, however silly it is."
Now, Kathleen's idea was quite simple. It was only that perhaps the ring would change its powers if someone else renamed it, someone who was not under the power of its enchantment. So the moment it had passed from the long, pale hand of Mabel to one of her own fat, warm, red paws, she jumped up, crying,
"Let's go and empty the dinosaurus now,"
and started to run swiftly towards that prehistoric monster. She had a good start. She wanted to say aloud, yet so that the others could not hear her,
"This is a wishing ring. It gives you any wish you choose."
And she did say it, and no one heard her, except the birds and a squirrel or two, and perhaps a stone fawn, whose pretty face seemed to turn a laughing look on her as she raced past its pedestal. The way was uphill. It was sunny, and Kathleen had run her hardest, though her brothers caught her up before she reached the great black shadow of the dinosaurus. So that when she did reach that shadow, she was very hot indeed, and not in any state to decide calmly on the best wish to ask for.
"I'll get up and move the things down, because I know exactly where I put them,"
she said. Gerald made a back. Jimmy assisted her to climb up, and she disappeared through the hole into the dark inside of the monster. In a moment, a shower began to descend from the opening. A shower of empty waistcoats, trousers with wildly waving legs, and coats with sleeves uncontrolled.
"Heads below,"
called Kathleen, and down came walking sticks and golf sticks, and hockey sticks and broomsticks, rattling and chattering to each other as they came.
"Come on,"
said Jimmy.
"Hold on a bit," said Gerald. "I'm coming up."
He caught the edge of the hole above in his hands and jumped. Just as he got his shoulders through the opening and his knees on the edge, he heard Kathleen's boots on the floor of the Dinosaurus's inside, and Kathleen's voice saying,
"Isn't it jolly cool in here? I suppose statues are always cool. I do wish I was a statue. Oh!"
The "oh" was a cry of horror and anguish, and it seemed to be cut off very short by a dreadful, stony silence. "What's up?" Gerald asked. But in his heart, he knew. He climbed up into the great hollow. In the little light that came up through the hole, he could see something white against the gray of the creature's sides. He felt in his pockets, still kneeling, struck a match, and when the blue of its flame changed to clear yellow, he looked up to see what he had known he would see. The face of Kathleen, white, stony, and lifeless. Her hair was white, too, and her hands, clothes, shoes, everything was white, with the hard, cold whiteness of marble. Kathleen had her wish. She was a statue. There was a long moment of perfect stillness in the inside of the Dinosaurus. Gerald could not speak. It was too sudden, too terrible. It was worse than anything that had happened yet. Then he turned and spoke down out of that cold, stony silence to Jimmy in the green, sunny, rustling, live world outside. "Jimmy," he said, in tones perfectly ordinary and matter-of-fact, "Kathleen's gone and said that ring was a wishing ring. And so it was, of course. I see now what she was up to, running like that. And then the young duffer went and wished she was a statue." "And is she?" asked Jimmy below. "Come up and have a look," said Gerald. And Jimmy came, partly with a pull from Gerald, and partly with a jump of his own. "She's a statue, right enough," he said in awestruck tones. "Isn't it awful?" "Not at all," said Gerald firmly. "Come on, let's go and tell Mabel." To Mabel, therefore, who had discreetly remained with her long length screened by rhododendrons, the two boys returned and broke the news. They broke it as one breaks a bottle with a pistol shot.
"Oh, my goodness,"
said Mabel, and writhed through her long length so that the leaves and fern tumbled off in little showers, and she felt the sun suddenly hot on the backs of her legs.
"What next? Oh, my goodness!"
"She'll come all right," said Gerald with outward calm.
"Yes, but what about me?"
Mabel urged.
"I haven't got the ring, and my time will be up before hers is. Couldn't you get it back? Can't you get it off her hand? I'd put it back on her hand the very minute I was my right size again. Faithfully, I would."
"Well, it's nothing to blub about," said Jimmy, answering the sniffs that had served her in the speech for commas and full stops. "Not for you, anyway."
You don't know,"
said Mabel.
"You don't know what it is to be as long as I am. Do try and get the ring. After all, it is my ring, more than any of the rest of yours anyhow, because I did find it, and I did say it was magic."
The sense of justice, always present in the breast of Gerald, awoke to this appeal. "I expect the ring's turned to stone. Her boots have, and all her clothes. But I'll go and see. Only, if I can't, I can't, and it's no use your making a silly fuss." The first match lighted inside the Dinosaurus showed the ring, dark on the white hand of the statuesque Kathleen. The fingers were stretched straight out. Gerald took hold of the ring, and to his surprise, it slipped easily off the cold, smooth marble finger. "I say, Kathy, old girl, I am sorry," he said, and gave the marble hand a squeeze. Then it came to him that perhaps she could hear him. So he told the statue exactly what he and the others meant to do. This helped to clear up his ideas as to what he and the others did mean to do, so that when, after thumping the statue hardeningly on its marble back, he returned to the rhododendrons, he was able to give his orders with the clear precision of a born leader, as he later said. And since the others had, neither of them, thought of any plans, his plan was accepted, as the plans of born leaders are apt to be. "Here's your precious ring," he said to Mabel. "Now, you're not frightened of anything, are you?"
"No,"
said Mabel, in surprise.
"I'd forgotten that. Look here, I'll stay here or farther up in the wood if you'll leave me all the coats so that I shan't be cold in the night. Then I shall be here when Kathleen comes out of the stone again."
"Yes," said Gerald, "that was exactly the born leader's idea."
"You two go home and tell Mademoiselle that Kathleen's staying at the Towers. She is."
"Yes," said Jimmy, "she certainly is." "The magic goes in 7-hour lots," said Gerald. "Your invisibility was 21 hours, mine 14, Eliza's 7. When it was a wishing ring, it began with 7. But there's no knowing what number it will be really, so there's no knowing which of you will come right first. Anyhow, we'll sneak out by the cistern window and come down the trellis after we've said good night to Mademoiselle, and come and have a look at you before we go to bed. I think you'd better come close up to the Dinosaurus, and we'll leaf you over before we go." Mabel crawled into cover of the taller trees, and there stood up, looking as slender as a poplar, and as unreal as the wrong answer to a sum in long division. It was to her an easy matter to crouch beneath the Dinosaurus, to put her head up through the opening, and thus to behold the white form of Kathleen.
"It's all right, dear," she told the stone image. "I shall be quite close to you. You call me as soon as you feel you're coming right again."
The statue remained motionless, as statues usually do, and Mabel withdrew her head again, lay down, was covered up, and left. The boys went home. It was the only reasonable thing to do. It would never have done for Mademoiselle to become anxious and set the police on their track. Everyone felt that. The shock of discovering the missing Kathleen, not only in a dinosaurus's stomach, but further in a stone statue of herself, might well have unhinged the mind of any constable, to say nothing of the mind of Mademoiselle, which, being foreign, would necessarily be a mind more light and easy to upset. While, as for Mabel, "Well, to look at her as she is now," said Gerald, "why, it would send anyone off their chump, except us." "We're different," said Jimmy. "Our chumps have had to jolly well get used to things. It would take a lot to upset us now." "Poor old Kathy, all the same," said Gerald. "Yes, of course," said Jimmy. The sun had died away behind the black trees, and the moon was rising. Mabel, her preposterous length covered with coats, waistcoats, and trousers laid along it, slept peacefully in the chill of the evening. Inside the Dinosaurus, Kathleen, alive in her marble, slept too. She had heard Gerald's words, had seen the lighted matches. She was Kathleen, just the same as ever, only she was Kathleen in a case of marble that would not let her move. It would not have let her cry, even if she wanted to. But she had not wanted to cry. Inside, the marble was not cold or hard. It seemed, somehow, to be softly lined with warmth and pleasantness and safety. Her back did not ache with stooping. Her limbs were not stiff, with the hours that they had stayed moveless. Everything was well, better than well. One had only to wait quietly and quite comfortably, and one would come out of the stone case, and once more be the Kathleen one had always been used to being. So she waited, happily and calmly, and presently waiting changed to not waiting, to not anything. And close held in the soft inwardness of the marble, she slept as peacefully and calmly as though she had been lying in her own bed. She was awakened by the fact that she was not lying in her own bed, was not, indeed, lying at all, by the fact that she was standing, and that her feet had pins and needles in them. Her arms, too, held out in that odd way, were stiff and tired. She rubbed her eyes, yawned, and remembered. She had been a statue inside the stone dinosaurus.
"Now I'm alive again,"
was her instant conclusion,
"and I'll get out of it."
She sat down, put her feet through the hole that showed faintly gray in the stone beast's underside, and as she did so, a long, slow lurch threw her sideways on the stone where she sat. The dinosaurus was moving.
"Oh!"
said Kathleen inside it.
"How dreadful! It must be moonlight and has come alive, like Gerald said."
It was indeed moving. She could see through the hole the changing surface of grass and bracken and moss as it waddled heavily along. She dared not drop through the hole while it moved, for fear it should crush her to death with its gigantic feet. And with that thought came another. Where was Mabel? Somewhere near? Suppose one of the great feet planted itself on some part of Mabel's inconvenient length. Mabel being the size she was now, it would be quite difficult not to step on some part or other of her if she should happen to be in one's way. Quite difficult, however much one tried. And the dinosaurus would not try. Why should it? Kathleen hung in an agony over the round opening. The huge beast swung from side to side. It was going faster. It was no good. She dared not jump out. Anyhow, they must be quite away from Mabel by now. Faster and faster went the dinosaurus. The floor of its stomach sloped. They were going downhill. Twigs cracked and broke as it pushed through a belt of evergreen oaks. Gravel crunched, ground beneath its stony feet. Then stone met stone. There was a pause. A splash! They were close to water. The lake where by moonlight Hermes fluttered, and Janus and the dinosaurus swam together. Kathleen dropped swiftly through the hole onto the flat marble that edged the basin, rushed sideways, and stood panting in the shadow of a statue's pedestal. Not a moment too soon, for even as she crouched, the monster lizard slipped heavily into the water, drowning 1,000 smooth, shining lily pads, and swam away towards the central island. "Be still, little lady, I leap." The voice came from the pedestal, and next moment Phoebus had jumped from the pedestal in his little temple, clearing the steps and landing a couple of yards away. "You are new," said Phoebus over his graceful shoulder. "I should not have forgotten you if once I had seen you."
"I am,"
said Kathleen.
Quite new, and I didn't know you could talk."
"Why not?" Phoebus laughed. "You can talk."
"But I'm alive."
"Am not I?" he asked.
"Oh, yes, I suppose so,"
said Kathleen, distracted but not afraid.
"Only I thought you had to have the ring on before one could even see you move."
Phoebus seemed to understand her, which was rather to his credit, for she had certainly not expressed herself with clearness. "Ah, that's for mortals," he said. We can hear and see each other in the few moments when life is ours. That is a part of the beautiful enchantment."
"But I am immortal,"
said Kathleen. "You are as modest as you are charming," said Phoebus Apollo absently. "The white water calls me. I go." And the next moment, rings of liquid silver spread across the lake, widening and widening from the spot where the white joined hands of the sun god had struck the water as he dived. Kathleen turned and went up the hill towards the rhododendron bushes. She must find Mabel, and they must go home at once. If only Mabel was of a size that one could conveniently take home with one. Most likely, at this hour of enchantments, she was. Kathleen, hardened by the thought, hurried on. She passed through the rhododendron bushes, remembered the pointed, painted paper face that had looked out from the glossy leaves, expected to be frightened, and wasn't. She found Mabel easily enough, and much more easily than she would have done had Mabel been as she wished to find her. For quite a long way off in the moonlight, she could see that long and worm-like form, extended to its full 12 feet, and covered with coats and trousers and waistcoats. Mabel looked like a drain-pipe that has been covered in sacks in frosty weather. Kathleen touched her long cheek gently, and she woke.
"What's up?"
she said sleepily.
"It's only me,"
Kathleen explained.
"How cold your hands are,"
said Mabel.
"Wake up,"
said Kathleen,
"and let's talk. Can't we go home now? I'm awfully tired, and it's so long since tea time." "You're too long to go home yet,"
said Kathleen sadly. And then Mabel remembered. She lay with closed eyes. Then suddenly she stirred and cried out,
"Oh, Kathy, I feel so funny, like one of those horn snakes when you make it go short to get it into its box. I am, yes, I know I am."
She was, and Kathleen, watching her, agreed that it was exactly like the shortening of a horn spiral snake between the closing hands of a child. Mabel's distant feet drew near. Mabel's long, lean arms grew shorter. Mabel's face was no longer half a yard long.
"You're coming right, you are! Oh, I am so glad!"
cried Kathleen.
"I know I am,"
said Mabel. And as she said it, she became once more Mabel, not only in herself, which of course she had been all the time, but in her outward appearance.
"You are all right. Oh, hooray, hooray! I am so glad,"
said Kathleen kindly.
"And now we'll go home at once, dear." "Go home?"
said Mabel, slowly sitting up and staring at Kathleen with her big, dark eyes.
"Go home? Like that? Like what?"
Kathleen asked impatiently.
"Why, you,"
was Mabel's odd reply.
"I'm all right,"
said Kathleen.
"Come on." "Do you mean to say you don't know?"
said Mabel.
"Look at yourself, your hands, your dress, everything."
Kathleen looked at her hands. They were of marble whiteness. Her dress, too, her shoes, her stockings, even the ends of her hair. She was white as new-fallen snow.
"What is it?"
she asked, beginning to tremble.
"What am I all this horrid color for? Don't you see? Oh, Kathy, don't you see? You've not come right. You're a statue still." "I'm not. I'm alive. I'm talking to you." "I know you are, darling,"
said Mabel, soothing her as one soothes a fractious child.
"That's because it's moonlight." "But you can see I'm alive." "Of course I can. I've got the ring." "But I'm all right. I know I am." "Don't you see?"
said Mabel gently, taking her white marble hand. "You're not all right.
It's moonlight, and you're a statue, and you've just come alive with all the other statues. And when the moon goes down, you'll just be a statue again. That's the difficulty, dear, about our going home again. You are just a statue still, only you've come alive with the other marble things. Where's the Dinosaurus?" "In his bath," said Kathleen, "and so are all the other stone beasts." "Well," said Mabel, trying to look on the bright side of things, "then we've got one thing at any rate to be thankful for." End of Chapter 9. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to find out how you can volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Enchanted Castle by E. Nesbit. Recorded by Peter Eastman. Chapter 10.
"If,"
said Kathleen, sitting disconsolate in her marble,
"if I am really a statue come alive, I wonder you're not afraid of me."
"I've got the ring," said Mabel with decision.
"Cheer up, dear. You will soon be better. Try not to think about it."
She spoke as you speak to a child that has cut its finger, or fallen down on the garden path, and rises up with grazed knees to which gravel sticks intimately.
"I know,"
Kathleen absently answered.
"And I've been thinking,"
said Mabel brightly,
"we might find out a lot about this magic place if the other statues aren't too proud to talk to us." "They aren't,"
Kathleen assured her.
"At least, Phoebus wasn't. He was most awfully polite and nice."
"Where is he?" Mabel asked.
"In the lake. He was,"
said Kathleen.
"Then let's go down there,"
said Mabel.
"Oh, Kathy, it's jolly being your own proper thickness again."
She jumped up, and the withered ferns and branches that had covered her long length and had been gathered closely upon her as she shrank to her proper size, fell as forest leaves do when sudden storms tear them. But the white Kathleen did not move. The two sat on the gray moonlit grass, with the quiet of the night all about them. The great park was still as a painted picture. Only the splash of the fountains and the far-off whistle of the Western Express broke the silence, which, at the same time, they deepened.
"What cheer, little sister?"
said a voice behind them. A golden voice. They turned quick, startled heads, as birds, surprised, might turn. There in the moonlight stood Phoebus, dripping still from the lake, and smiling at them, very gentle, very friendly.
"Oh, it's you,"
said Kathleen.
"None other,"
said Phoebus cheerfully.
"Who is your friend, the Earth Child?"
"This is Mabel," said Kathleen. Mabel got up and bowed, hesitated, and held out a hand.
"I am your slave, little lady,"
said Phoebus, enclosing it in marble fingers.
"But I fail to understand how you can see us, and why you do not fear."
Mabel held up the hand that wore the ring.
"Quite sufficient explanation," said Phoebus. "But since you have that, why retain your mottled, earthy appearance? Become a statue, and swim with us in the lake."
"I can't swim," said Mabel evasively.
"Nor yet me,"
said Kathleen.
"You can," said Phoebus. "All statues that come to life are proficient in all athletic exercises. And you, child of the dark eyes and hair like night, wish yourself a statue and join our revels." "I'd rather not, if you will excuse me," said Mabel cautiously. "You see, this ring,
You wish for things, and you never know how long they're going to last. It would be jolly and all that to be a statue now, but in the morning I should wish I hadn't.
Earth folk often do, they say, mused Phoebus. But, child, you seem ignorant of the powers of your ring. Wish exactly, and the ring will exactly perform. If you give no limit of time, strange enchantments woven by Arithmos, the outcast god of numbers, will creep in and spoil the spell. Say thus, I wish that till the dawn I may be a statue of living marble, even as my child friend, and that after that time I may be as before, Mabel, of the dark eyes and night-colored hair.
Oh, yes, do. It would be so jolly,
cried Kathleen.
Do, Mabel. And if we're both statues, shall we be afraid of the Dinosaurus?
In the world of living marble, fear is not, said Phoebus. Are we not brothers, we and the Dinosaurus? Brethren alike, wrought of stone and life?
And I could swim if I did?
Swim and float and dive, and with the ladies of Olympus spread the nightly feast, eat of the food of the gods, drink their cup, listen to the song that is undying, and catch the laughter of immortal lips.
A feast,
said Kathleen.
Oh, Mabel, do. You would if you were as hungry as I am.
But it won't be real food, urged Mabel. It will be real to you as to us, said Phoebus. There is no other realness, even in your many-colored world. Still, Mabel hesitated. Then she looked at Kathleen's legs, and suddenly said,
Very well, I will. But first I'll take off my shoes and stockings. Marble boots look simply awful, especially the laces, and a marble stocking that's coming down, and mine do.
She had pulled off shoes and stockings and pinafore. Mabel has the sense of beauty, said Phoebus approvingly. Speak the spell, child, and I will lead you to the ladies of Olympus. Mabel, trembling a little, spoke it, and there were 2 little live statues in the moonlit glade. Tall Phoebus took a hand of each. Come, run, he cried, and they ran.
Oh, it is jolly,
Mabel panted.
Look at my white feet in the grass. I thought it would feel stiff to be a statue, but it doesn't.
There is no stiffness about the immortals, laughed the sun god, for tonight you are one of us. And with that, they ran down the slope to the lake. Jump, he cried, and they jumped, and the water splashed up round 3 white gleaming shapes.
Oh, I can swim,
breathed Kathleen.
So can I,
said Mabel. Of course you can, said Phoebus. Now, 3 times round the lake, and then make for the island. Side by side the 3 swam, Phoebus swimming gently to keep pace with the children. Their marble clothes did not seem to interfere at all with their swimming, as your clothes would if you suddenly jumped into the basin of the Trafalgar Square fountains and tried to swim there. And they swam most beautifully, with that perfect ease and absence of effort or tiredness which you must have noticed about your own swimming, in dreams. And it was the most lovely place to swim in. The water lilies, whose long, snaky stalks are so inconvenient to ordinary swimmers, did not in the least interfere with the movements of marble arms and legs. The moon was high in the clear sky dome. The weeping willows, cypresses, pimples, terraces, banks of trees and shrubs, and the wonderful old house, all added to the romantic charm of the scene.
This is the nicest thing the ring has brought us yet,
said Mabel, through a languid but perfect side stroke. I thought you'd enjoy it, said Phoebus kindly. "Now, once more round, and then the island." They landed on the island, amid a fringe of rushes, yarrow, willow herb, loosestrife, and a few late-scented, powdery, creamy heads of meadowsweet. The island was bigger than it looked from the bank, and it seemed covered with trees and shrubs. But when, Phoebus leading the way, they went into the shadow of these, they perceived that beyond the trees lay a light, much nearer to them than the other side of the island could possibly be. And almost at once they were through the belt of trees, and could see where the light came from. The trees they had just passed among made a dark circle round a big cleared space, standing up thick and dark, like a crowd round a football field, as Kathleen remarked. First came a wide, smooth ring of lawn, then marble steps going down to a round pool, where there were no water lilies, only gold and silver fish that darted here and there like flashes of quicksilver and dark flames. And the enclosed space of water and marble and grass was lighted with a clear, white, radiant light, 7 times stronger than the whitest moonlight. And in the still waters of the pool, 7 moons lay reflected. One could see that they were only reflections by the way their shape broke and changed as the gold and silver fish rippled the water with moving fin and tail that steered. The girls looked up at the sky, almost expecting to see 7 moons there. But no, the old moon shone alone, as she had always shone on them.
"There are 7 moons,"
said Mabel blankly, and pointed, which is not manners. "Of course," said Phoebus kindly. "Everything in our world is 7 times as much so as in yours."
"But there aren't 7 of you,"
said Mabel. "No, but I am 7 times as much," said the sun god. "You see, there's numbers, and then there's quantity, to say nothing of quality. You see that, I'm sure."
"Not quite,"
said Kathleen. "Explanations always weary me," Phoebus interrupted. "Shall we join the ladies?" On the further side of the pool was a large group, so white that it seemed to make a great white hole in the trees. Some 20 or 30 figures there were in the group, all statues, and all alive. Some were dipping their white feet among the gold and silver fish, and sending ripples across the faces of the 7 moons. Some were pelting each other with roses, roses so sweet that the girls could smell them even across the pool. Others were holding hands and dancing in a ring, and 2 were sitting on the steps playing cat's cradle, which is a very ancient game indeed, with a thread of white marble. As the newcomers advanced, a shout of greeting and gay laughter went up. "Late again, Phoebus," someone called out, and another, "Did one of your horses cast a shoe?" And yet another called out something about laurels. "I bring 2 guests," said Phoebus, and instantly the statues crowded round, stroking the girls' hair, patting their cheeks, and calling them the prettiest love names. "Are the wreaths ready, Hebe?" the tallest and most splendid of the ladies called out. "Make 2 more." And almost directly, Hebe came down the steps, her round arms hung thick with rose wreaths. There was one for each marble head. Everyone now looked 7 times more beautiful than before, which in the case of the gods and goddesses is saying a good deal. The children remembered how at the raspberry vinegar feast Mademoiselle had said that gods and goddesses always wore wreaths for meals. Hebe herself arranged the roses on the girls' heads, and Aphrodite Urania, the dearest lady in the world, with a voice like mother's at those moments when you love her most, took them by the hands and said,
"Come, we must get the feast ready. Eros, Psyche, Hebe, Ganymede, all you young people can arrange the fruit." "I don't see any fruit,"
said Kathleen, as 4 slender forms disengaged themselves from the white crowd and came towards them.
"You will, though,"
said Eros, a really nice boy, as the girls instantly agreed.
"You've only got to pick it." "Like this,"
said Psyche, lifting her marble arms to a willow branch. She reached out her hand to the children. It held a ripe pomegranate.
"I see,"
said Mabel.
"You just—"
She laid her fingers to the willow branch, and the firm softness of a big peach was within them.
"Yes, just that,"
laughed Psyche, who was a darling, as anyone could see. After this, Hebe gathered a few silver baskets from a convenient alder, and the 4 picked fruit industriously. Meanwhile, the elder statues were busy plucking golden goblets and jugs and dishes from the branches of ash trees and young oaks, and filling them with everything nice to eat and drink that anyone could possibly want, and these were spread on the steps. It was a celestial picnic. Then everyone sat or lay down, and the feast began. And oh, the taste of the food served on those dishes, the sweet wonder of the drink that melted from those golden cups on the white lips of the company. And the fruit. There is no fruit like it grown on earth, just as there is no laughter like the laughter of those lips, no songs like the songs that stirred the silence of that night of wonder.
"Oh!"
cried Kathleen, and through her fingers the juice of her 3rd peach fell like tears on the marble steps.
"I do wish the boys were here." "I do wonder what they're doing,"
said Mabel.
"At this moment,"
said Hermes, who had just made a wide ring of flight, as a pigeon does, and come back into the circle. "At this moment they are wandering desolately near the home of the Dinosaurus, having escaped from their home by a window, in search of you. They fear that you have perished, and they would weep if they did not know that tears do not become a man, however youthful." Kathleen stood up and brushed the crumbs of ambrosia from her marble lap.
"Thank you all very much,"
she said.
"It was very kind of you to have us, and we've enjoyed ourselves very much, but I think we ought to go now, please."
"If it is anxiety about your brothers," said Phoebus obligingly, "it is the easiest thing in the world for them to join you. Lend me your ring a moment." He took it from Kathleen's half-reluctant hand, dipped it in the reflection of one of the 7 moons, and gave it back. She clutched it. "Now," said the sun god, "wish for them that which Mabel wished for herself. Say—"
"I know,"
Kathleen interrupted.
"I wish that the boys may be statues of living marble, like Mabel and me till dawn, and afterwards be like they are now."
"If you hadn't interrupted," said Phoebus, "but there, we can't expect old heads on shoulders of young marble. You should have wished them here, but no matter. Hermes, old chap, cut across and fetch them, and explain things as you come." He dipped the ring again in one of the reflected moons before he gave it back to Kathleen. "There," he said, "now it's washed clean, ready for the next magic." "It is not our custom to question guests," said Hera the queen, turning her great eyes on the children, "but that ring excites, I am sure, the interest of us all." "It is the ring," said Phoebus. "That, of course," said Hera, "but if it were not inhospitable to ask questions, I should ask, how came it into the hands of these earth children?" "That," said Phoebus, "is a long tale. After the feast, the story, and after the story, the song." Hermes seemed to have explained everything quite fully. For when Gerald and Jimmy, in marble whiteness, arrived, each clinging to one of the gods' winged feet, and so borne through the air, they were certainly quite at ease. They made their best bows to the goddesses, and took their places, as unembarrassed as though they had had Olympian suppers every night of their lives. Hebe had woven wreaths of roses ready for them, and as Kathleen watched them eating and drinking, perfectly at home in their marble, she was very glad that amid the welling springs of immortal peach juice, she had not forgotten her brothers. "And now," said Hera, when the boys had been supplied with everything they could possibly desire, and more than they could eat, "now for the story." "Yes," said Mabel intensely, and Kathleen said, "Oh, yes, now for the story. How splendid!" "The story," said Phoebus unexpectedly, "will be told by our guests." "Oh, no!" said Kathleen, shrinking. "The lads, maybe, are bolder," said Zeus the king, taking off his rose wreath, which was a little tight, and rubbing his compressed ears. "I really can't," said Gerald. "Besides, I don't know any stories." "Nor yet me," said Jimmy. "It's the story of how we got the ring that they want," said Mabel in a hurry. "I'll tell it if you like. Once upon a time there was a little girl called Mabel," she added yet more hastily, and went on with the tale. All the tale of the Enchanted Castle, or almost all, that you have read in these pages. The marble Olympians listened enchanted, almost as enchanted as the castle itself, and the soft moonlit moments fell past, like pearls dropping into a deep pool. "And so," Mabel ended abruptly, "Kathleen wished for the boys, and the Lord Hermes fetched them, and here we all are." A burst of interested comment and question blossomed out round the end of the story, suddenly broken off short by Mabel. "But," said she, brushing it aside as it grew thinner, "now we want you to tell us." "To tell you?" "How you come to be alive, and how you know about the ring, and everything you do know." "Everything I know?" Phoebus laughed. It was to him that she had spoken, and not his lips only, but all the white lips curled in laughter. "The span of your life, my earth child, would not contain the words I should speak to tell you all I know." "Well, about the ring, anyhow, and how you come alive," said Gerald. "You see, it's very puzzling to us." "Tell them, Phoebus," said the dearest lady in the world. "Don't tease the children." So Phoebus, leaning back against a heap of leopard skins that Dionysus had lavishly plucked from a spruce fir, told. "All statues," he said, "can come alive when the moon shines, if they so choose. But statues that are placed in ugly cities do not choose. Why should they weary themselves with the contemplation of the hideous?" "Quite so," said Gerald politely, to fill the pause. "In your beautiful temples," the sun god went on, "the images of your priests and of your warriors who lie cross-legged on their tombs come alive and walk in their marble about their temples and through the woods and fields. But only on one night in all the year can any see them. You have beheld us because you held the ring, and are of one brotherhood with us in your marble. But on that one night all may behold us." "And when is that?" Gerald asked, again polite, in a pause. "At the festival of the harvest," said Phoebus. "On that night, as the moon rises, it strikes one beam of perfect light onto the altar in certain temples. One of these temples is in Hellas, buried under the fall of a mountain, which Zeus, being angry, hurled down upon it. One is in this land. It is in this great garden." "Then," said Gerald, much interested, "if we were to come up to that temple on that night, we could see you, even without being statues or having the ring?" "Even so," said Phoebus. "More, any question asked by a mortal, we are on that night bound to answer." "And the night is when?" "Ah," said Phoebus, and laughed. "Wouldn't you like to know?" Then the great marble king of the gods yawned, stroked his long beard, and said, "Enough of stories, Phoebus. Tune your lyre."
"But the ring,"
said Mabel in a whisper, as the sun god tuned the white strings of a sort of marble harp that lay at his feet.
"About how you know all about the ring."
"Presently," the sun god whispered back. "Zeus must be obeyed. But ask me again before dawn, and I will tell you all I know of it." Mabel drew back, and leaned against the comfortable knees of one Demeter. Kathleen and Psyche sat holding hands. Gerald and Jimmy lay at full length, chins on elbows, gazing at the sun god. And even as he held the lyre, before ever his fingers began to sweep the strings, the spirit of music hung in the air, enchanting, enslaving, silencing all thought but the thought of itself, all desire but the desire to listen to it. Then Phoebus struck the strings, and softly plucked melody from them, and all the beautiful dreams of all the world came fluttering close, with wings like doves' wings, and all the lovely thoughts that sometimes hover near, but not so near that you can catch them, now came home, as to their nests in the hearts of those who listened. And those who listened forgot time and space, and how to be sad, and how to be naughty, and it seemed that the whole world lay like a magic apple in the hand of each listener, and that the whole world was good and beautiful. And then, suddenly, the spell was shattered. Phoebus struck a broken chord, followed by an instant of silence. Then he sprang up, crying, "The dawn! The dawn! To your pedestals, O gods!" In an instant, the whole crowd of beautiful marble people had leapt to its feet, had rushed through the belt of wood that cracked and rustled as they went, and the children heard them splash in the water beyond. They heard, too, the gurgling breathing of a great beast, and knew that the Dinosaurus, too, was returning to his own place. Only Hermes had time, since one flies more swiftly than one swims, to hover above them for one moment, and to whisper with a mischievous laugh, "In 14 days from now, at the Temple of Strange Stones."
"What's the secret of the ring?"
gasped Mabel.
"The ring is the heart of the magic," said Hermes. "Ask at the moonrise on the 14th day, and you shall know all."
With that, he waved the snowy caduceus, and rose in the air, supported by his winged feet. And as he went, the 7 reflected moons died out, and a chill wind began to blow. A gray light grew and grew. The birds stirred and twittered, and the marble slipped away from the children, like a skin that shrivels in fire, and they were statues no more, but flesh and blood children, as they used to be, standing knee-deep in brambles and long, coarse grass. There was no smooth lawn, no marble steps, no 7-mooned fish pond. The dew lay thick on the grass and the brambles, and it was very cold.
"We ought to have gone with them," said Mabel with chattering teeth, "and we can't swim now we're not marble. And I suppose this is the island?"
It was, and they couldn't swim. They knew it. One always knows those sort of things somehow, without trying. For instance, you know perfectly that you can't fly. There are some things that there is no mistake about. The dawn grew brighter, and the outlook more black every moment.
"There isn't a boat, I suppose?"
Jimmy asked.
"No,"
said Mabel.
"not on this side of the lake. There's one in the boathouse, of course, if you could swim there."
"You know I can't," said Jimmy.
"Can't anyone think of anything?"
Gerald asked, shivering.
"When they find we've disappeared, they'll drag all the water for miles around,"
said Jimmy hopefully.
"in case we've fallen in and sunk to the bottom. When they come to drag this, we can yell and be rescued."
"Yes, dear, that will be nice," was Gerald's bitter comment.
"Don't be so disagreeable,"
said Mabel, with a tone so strangely cheerful that the rest stared at her in amazement.
"The ring," she said. "Of course we've only got to wish ourselves home with it. Phoebus washed it in the moon, ready for the next wish."
"You didn't tell us about that," said Gerald, in accents of perfect good temper. "Never mind. Where is the ring?"
"You had it,"
Mabel reminded Kathleen.
"I know I had,"
said that child, in stricken tones.
"But I gave it to Psyche to look at, and she's cut it on her finger."
Everyone tried not to be angry with Kathleen. All partly succeeded. "If we ever get off this beastly island," said Gerald, "I suppose you can find Psyche's statue and get it off again?"
"No, I can't,"
Mabel moaned.
"I don't know where the statue is. I've never seen it. It may be in Hellas, wherever that is, or anywhere for anything I know."
No one had anything kind to say, and it is pleasant to record that nobody said anything. And now it was gray daylight, and the sky to the north was flushing in pale pink and lavender. The boys stood moodily, hands in pockets. Mabel and Kathleen seemed to find it impossible not to cling together, and all about their legs the long grass was icy with dew. A faint sniff and a caught breath broke the silence. "Now, look here," said Gerald briskly. "I won't have it. Do you hear? Sniffling's no good at all. No, I'm not a pig. It's for your own good. Let's make a tour of the island. Perhaps there's a boat hidden somewhere among the overhanging boughs."
"How could there be?"
Mabel asked. "Someone might have left it there, I suppose," said Gerald.
"But how would they have got off the island?"
"In another boat, of course," said Gerald. "Come on." Downheartedly, and quite sure that there wasn't and couldn't be any boat, the 4 children started to explore the island. How often each one of them had dreamed of islands. How often wished to be stranded on one. Well, now they were. Reality is sometimes quite different from dreams, and not half so nice. It was worst of all for Mabel, whose shoes and stockings were far away on the mainland. The coarse grass and brambles were very cruel to bare legs and feet. They stumbled through the wood to the edge of the water, but it was impossible to keep close to the edge of the island. The brambles grew too thickly. There was a narrow, grassy path that wound in and out among the trees, and this they followed, dejected and mournful. Every moment made it less possible for them to hope to get back to the schoolhouse unnoticed. And if they were missed, and beds found in their present unslept-in state, well, there would be a row of some sort, and as Gerald said, farewell to liberty. "Of course, we can get off all right," said Gerald. "Just all shout when we see a gardener or a keeper on the mainland. But if we do, concealment is at an end, and all is absolutely up." Yes, said everyone gloomily. Come, buck up, said Gerald, the spirit of the born general beginning to reawaken in him. We shall get out of this scrape all right, as we've got out of others. You know we shall. See, the sun's coming out. You feel all right and jolly now, don't you? Yes, oh yes, said everyone, in tones of unmixed misery. The sun was now risen, and through a deep cleft in the hills it sent a strong shaft of light straight at the island. The yellow light, almost level, struck through the stems of the trees and dazzled the children's eyes. This, with the fact that he was not looking where he was going, as Jimmy did not fail to point out later, was enough to account for what now happened to Gerald, who was leading the melancholy little procession. He stumbled, clutched at a tree trunk, missed his clutch, and disappeared, with a yell and a clatter. And Mabel, who came next, only pulled herself up just in time not to fall down a steep flight of moss-grown steps that seemed to open suddenly in the ground at her feet.
"Oh, Gerald!" she called down the steps. "Are you hurt?"
"No," said Gerald, out of sight and crossly, for he was hurt, rather severely. "It's steps, and there's a passage."
"There always is,"
said Jimmy.
"I knew there was a passage,"
said Mabel.
"It goes under the water and comes out at the Temple of Flora. Even the gardeners know that, but they won't go down for fear of snakes."
"Then we can get out that way."
"I do think you might have said so,"
Gerald's voice came up to say.
"I didn't think of it,"
said Mabel.
"At least, and I suppose it goes past the place where the Ugly Wuggly found its good hotel." "I'm not going," said Kathleen positively. "Not in the dark, I'm not, so I tell you."
"Very well, baby," said Gerald sternly, and his head appeared from below, very suddenly, through interlacing brambles. "No one asked you to go in the dark. We'll leave you here if you like, and return and rescue you with a boat. Jimmy, the bicycle lamp." He reached up a hand for it. Jimmy produced from his bosom the place where lamps are always kept in fairy stories, see Aladdin and others, a bicycle lamp. "We brought it," he explained, "so as not to break our shins over bits of log maple among the rhododendrons." "Now," said Gerald very firmly, striking a match and opening the thick, rounded glass front of the bicycle lamp, "I don't know what the rest of you are going to do, but I'm going down these steps and along this passage. If we find the good hotel, well, a good hotel never hurt anyone yet." "It's no good, you know," said Jimmy weakly. "You know jolly well you can't get out of that Temple of Flora door, even if you get to it." "I don't know," said Gerald, still brisk and commander-like. "There's a secret spring inside that door, most likely. We hadn't a lamp last time to look for it, remember?" "If there's one thing I do hate, it's undergroundness," said Mabel. "You're not a coward," said Gerald, with what is known as diplomacy. "You are brave, Mabel. Don't I know it? You hold Jimmy's hand, and I'll hold Kathy's. Now then." "I won't have my hand held," said Jimmy, of course. "I'm not a kid." "Well, Kathy will. Poor little Kathy. Nice brother Jerry'll hold poor Kathy's hand." Gerald's bitter sarcasm missed fire here, for Kathy gratefully caught the hand he held out in mockery. She was too miserable to read his mood, as she mostly did. "Oh, thank you, Jerry dear," she said gratefully. "You are a dear, and I will try not to be frightened." And for quite a minute, Gerald shamedly felt that he had not been quite kind. So now, leaving the growing goldness of the sunrise, the four went down the stone steps that led to the underground and underwater passage, and everything seemed to grow dark, and then to grow into a poor pretense of light again, as the splendor of dawn gave place to the small dogged lighting of the bicycle lamp. The steps did indeed lead to a passage, the beginnings of it choked with the drifted dead leaves of many old autumns. But presently the passage took a turn. There were more steps, down, down, and then the passage was empty and straight, lined above and below and on each side with slabs of marble, very clear and clean. Gerald held Kathy's hand with more of kindness and less of exasperation than he had supposed possible. And Kathy, on her part, was surprised to find it possible to be so much less frightened than she expected. The flame of the bullseye threw ahead a soft circle of misty light. The children followed it silently, till, silently and suddenly, the light of the bullseye behaved as the flame of a candle does when you take it out into the sunlight to light a bonfire, or explode a train of gunpowder, or what not. Because now, with feelings mixed indeed, of wonder and interest and awe, but no fear, the children found themselves in a great hall, whose arched roof was held up by 2 rows of round pillars, and whose every corner was filled with a soft, searching, lovely light, filling every cranny, as water fills the rocky secrecies of hidden sea caves.
"How beautiful!"
Kathleen whispered, breathing hard into the tickled ear of her brother. And Mabel caught the hand of Jimmy and whispered,
"I must hold your hand. I must hold on to something silly, or I shan't believe it's real."
For this hall in which the children found themselves was the most beautiful place in the world. I won't describe it, because it does not look the same to any 2 people, and you wouldn't understand me if I tried to tell you how it looked to any one of these 4. But to each it seemed the most perfect thing possible. I will only say that all round it were great arches. Kathleen saw them as Moorish, Mabel as Tudor, Gerald as Norman, and Jimmy as churchwarden Gothic. If you don't know what these are, ask your uncle who collects brasses, and he will explain. Or perhaps Mr. Miller will draw the different kinds of arches for you. And through these arches one could see many things. Oh, but many things. Through one appeared an olive garden, and in it 2 lovers who held each other's hands under an Italian moon. Through another, a wild sea, and a ship to whom the wild racing sea was slave. A third showed a king on his throne, his courtiers obsequious about him. And yet a fourth showed a really good hotel, with the respectable Ugly Wuggly sunning himself on the front doorsteps. There was a mother bending over a wooden cradle. There was an artist gazing entranced on the picture his wet brush seemed to have that moment completed. A general dying on a field where victory had planted the standard he loved. And these things were not pictures, but the truest truths, alive, and as anyone could see, immortal. Many other pictures there were that these arches framed, and all showed some moment when life had sprung to fire and flower, the best that the soul of man could ask, or man's destiny grant. And the really good hotel had its place here too, because there are some souls that ask no higher thing of life than a really good hotel.
"Oh, I am glad we came. I am,"
Kathleen murmured, and held fast to her brother's hand. They went slowly up the hall, the ineffectual bullseye held by Jimmy, very crooked indeed, showing almost as a shadow in this big, glorious light. And then, when the hall's end was almost reached, the children saw where the light came from. It glowed and spread itself from one place, and in that place stood the one statue that Mabel did not know where to find, the statue of Psyche. They went on, slowly, quite happy, quite bewildered. And when they came close to Psyche, they saw that on her raised hand the ring showed dark. Gerald let go Kathleen's hand, put his foot on the pediment, his knee on the pedestal. He stood up, dark and human, beside the white girl with the butterfly wings. "I do hope you don't mind," he said, and drew the ring off very gently. Then, as he dropped to the ground, "Not here," he said. "I don't know why, but not here." And they all passed behind the white Psyche, and once more the bicycle lamp seemed suddenly to come to life again, as Gerald held it in front of him, to be the pioneer in the dark passage that led from the hall of... But they did not know, then, what it was the hall of. Then, as the twisting passage shut in on them with a darkness that pressed close against the little light of the bicycle lamp, Kathleen said,
"Give me the ring. I know exactly what to say."
Gerald gave it, with not extreme readiness.
"I wish," said Kathleen slowly, "that no one at home may know that we've been out tonight, and I wish we were safe in our own beds, undressed and in our nightgowns, and asleep."
And the next thing any of them knew, it was good, strong, ordinary daylight. Not just sunrise, but the kind of daylight you are used to being called in, and all were in their own beds. Kathleen had framed the wish most sensibly. The only mistake had been in saying, "in our own beds," because, of course, Mabel's own bed was at Yalding Towers, and to this day, Mabel's drab-haired aunt cannot understand how Mabel, who was staying the night with that child in the town she was so taken up with, hadn't come home at 11 when the aunt locked up, and yet she was in her bed in the morning. For, though not a clever woman, she was not stupid enough to be able to believe any one of the 11 fancy explanations which the distracted Mabel offered in the course of the morning. The first, which makes 12 of these explanations, was the truth, and of course the aunt was far too clever to believe that. End of Chapter 10. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to find out how you can volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Enchanted Castle by E. Nesbit. Recorded by Peter Eastman. Chapter 11. It was show day at Yalding Castle, and it seemed good to the children to go and visit Mabel, and, as Gerald put it, to mingle unsuspected with the crowd, to gloat over all the things which they knew and which the crowd didn't know about the castle and the sliding panels, the magic ring, and the statues that came alive. Perhaps one of the pleasantest things about magic happenings is the feeling which they give you of knowing what other people not only don't know, but wouldn't, so to speak, believe if they did. On the white road outside the gates of the castle was a dark spattering of brakes and wagonettes and dog-carts. 3 or 4 waiting motor cars puffed fatly where they stood, and bicycles sprawled in heaps along the grassy hollow by the red brick wall. And the people who had been brought to the castle by the brakes and wagonettes and dog-carts and bicycles and motors as well as those who had walked there on their own unaided feet, were scattered about the grounds, or being shown over those parts of the castle which were, on this one day of the week, thrown open to visitors. There were more visitors than usual today, because it had somehow been whispered about that Lord Yalding was down, and that the Holland covers were to be taken off the state furniture, so that a rich American who wished to rent the castle to live in might see the place in all its glory. It certainly did look very splendid. The embroidered satin, gilded leather, and tapestry of the chairs, which had been hidden by brown holland, gave to the rooms a pleasant air of being lived in. There were flowering plants and pots of roses here and there on tables or window ledges. Mabel's aunt prided herself on her tasteful touch in the home, and had studied the arrangement of flowers in a series of articles in Home Drivel called How to Make Home High Class on 9d. a Week. The great crystal chandeliers, released from the bags that at ordinary times shrouded them, gleamed with gray and purple splendor. The brown linen sheets had been taken off the state beds, and the red ropes that usually kept the low crowd in its proper place had been rolled up and hidden away.
"It's exactly as if we were calling on the family,"
said the grocer's daughter from Salisbury to her friend who was in the millinery.
"If the Yankee doesn't take it, what do you say to you and me setting up here when we get spliced?"
the draper's assistant asked his sweetheart. And she said,
"Oh, Reggie, how can you? You are too funny."
All the afternoon, the crowd in its smart holiday clothes, pink blouses and light-colored suits, flowery hats, and scarves beyond description, passed through and through the dark hall, the magnificent drawing rooms and boudoirs and picture galleries. The chattering crowd was awed into something like quiet by the calm, stately bedchambers where men had been born and died, where royal guests had lain in long-ago summer nights, with big bow-pots of elderflowers set on the hearth to ward off fever and evil spells. The terrace, where in old days dames and roughs had sniffed the sweetbriar and southernwood of the borders below, and ladies, bright with rouge and powder and brocade, had walked in the swing of their hooped skirts. The terrace now echoed to the sound of brown boots, and the tap-tap of high-heeled shoes at 2 and 11:3, and high laughter and chattering voices that said nothing that the children wanted to hear. These spoiled for them the quiet of the Enchanted Castle, and outraged the peace of the Garden of Enchantments. "It isn't such a lark after all," Gerald admitted, as from the window of the stone summer-house at the end of the terrace they watched the loud colors and heard the loud laughter. "I do hate to see all these people in our garden."
"I said that to that nice bailiff man this morning,"
said Mabel, setting herself on the stone floor.
"And he said it wasn't much to let them come once a week. He said Lord Yalding ought to let them come when they liked. Said he would if he lived there."
"That's all he knows," said Jimmy.
"Did he say anything else?"
"Lots," said Mabel.
"I do like him. I told him—"
"You didn't!"
"Yes, I told him lots about our adventures. The humble bailiff is a beautiful listener."
"We shall be locked up for beautiful lunatics if you let your jaw get the better of you, my Mabel child."
"Not us,"
said Mabel.
"I told it, you know the way, every word true, and yet so that nobody believes any of it. When I'd quite done, he said I'd got a real literary talent, and I promised to put his name on the beginning of the first book I write when I grow up." "You don't know his name,"
said Kathleen.
"Let's do something with the ring."
"Imposs," said Gerald. "I forgot to tell you, but I met Mademoiselle when I went back for my garters, and she's coming to meet us and walk back with us."
"What did you say?"
"I said," said Gerald deliberately, "that it was very kind of her. And so it was. Us not wanting her doesn't make it not kind her coming."
"It may be kind, but it's sickening, too,"
said Mabel,
"because now I suppose we shall have to stick here and wait for her. And I promised we'd meet the bailiff man. He's going to bring things in a basket and have a picnic tea with us."
"Where?"
"Beyond the dinosaurus. He said he'd tell me all about the something animals. It means before Noah's Ark. There were lots besides the dinosaurus. In return for me telling him my agreeable fictions. Yes, he called them that."
"When?"
"As soon as the gates shut. That's 5.
"We might take Mademoiselle along," suggested Gerald.
"She'd be too proud to have tea with the bailiff, I expect. You never know how grown-ups will take the simplest things."
It was Kathleen who said this. "Well, I'll tell you what," said Gerald, lazily turning on the stone bench. "You all go along and meet your bailiff. A picnic's a picnic, and I'll wait for Mademoiselle." Mabel remarked joyously that this was jolly decent of Gerald, to which he modestly replied, "Oh, rot." Jimmy added that Gerald rather liked sucking up to people. "Little boys don't understand diplomacy," said Gerald calmly. "Sucking up is simply silly, but it's better to be good than pretty, and—" "How do you know?" Jimmy asked. "And," his brother went on, "you never know when a grown-up may come in useful. Besides, they like it. You must give them some little pleasures. Think how awful it must be to be old. My hat!"
"I hope I shan't be an old maid,"
said Kathleen.
"I don't mean to be,"
said Mabel briskly. "I'd rather marry a traveling tinker."
"It would be rather nice,"
Kathleen mused,
"to marry the gypsy king and go about in a caravan telling fortunes and hung round with baskets and brooms."
"Oh, if I could choose," said Mabel, "of course I'd marry a brigand, and live in his mountain fastnesses, and be kind to his captives, and help them to escape, and—" "You'll be a real treasure to your husband," said Gerald.
"Yes," said Kathleen, "or a sailor would be nice. You'd watch for his ship coming home, and set the lamp in the dormer window to light him home through the storm. And when he was drowned at sea, you'd be most frightfully sorry, and go every day to lay flowers on his daisied grave."
"Yes," Mabel hastened to say,
"or a soldier, and then you'd go to the wars with short petticoats and a cocked hat, and a barrel round your neck like a St. Bernard dog. There's a picture of a soldier's wife on a song Audie's got. It's called the Vivandière." "When I marry,"
Kathleen quickly said. "When I marry," said Gerald, "I'll marry a dumb girl, or else get the ring to make her so that she can't speak unless she's spoken to. Let's have a squint." He applied his eye to the stone lattice. "They're moving off," he said. "Those pink and purple hats are nodding off in the distant prospect. And the funny little man with the beard like a goat is going a different way from everyone else. The gardeners will have to head him off. I don't see Mademoiselle, though. The rest of you had better bunk. It doesn't do to run any risks with picnics." The deserted hero of our tale, alone and unsupported, urged on his brave followers to pursue the commissariat wagons, he himself remaining at the post of danger and difficulty, because he was born to stand on burning decks, whence all but he had fled, and to lead forlorn hopes when despaired of by the human race.
"I think I'll marry a dumb husband,"
said Mabel,
"and there shan't be any heroes in my books when I write them, only a heroine. Come on, Kathy."
Coming out of that cool, shadowy summer house into the sunshine was like stepping into an oven, and the stone of the terrace was burning to the children's feet.
"I know now what a cat on hot bricks feels like," said Jimmy.
The antediluvian animals are set in a beechwood, on a slope at least half a mile across the park from the castle. The grandfather of the present Lord Yalding had them set there in the middle of last century, in the great days of the late Prince Consort, the exhibition of 1851, Sir Joseph Paxton, and the Crystal Palace. Their stone flanks, their wide, ungainly wings, their lozenged, crocodile-like backs show gray through the trees a long way off. Most people think that noon is the hottest time of the day. They are wrong. A cloudless sky gets hotter and hotter all the afternoon, and reaches its very hottest at 5. I am sure you must all have noticed this when you are going out to tea anywhere in your best clothes, especially if your clothes are starched and you happen to have a rather long and shadeless walk. Kathleen, Mabel, and Jimmy got hotter and hotter, and went more and more slowly. They had almost reached that stage of resentment and discomfort when one wishes one hadn't come, before they saw, below the edge of the beechwood, the white waved handkerchief of the bailiff. That banner, eloquent of tea, shade, and being able to sit down, put new heart into them. They mended their pace, and a final desperate run landed them among the drifted coppery leaves and bare gray and green roots of the beechwood.
"Oh, glory!"
said Jimmy, throwing himself down.
"How do you do?"
The bailiff looked very nice, the girls thought. He was not wearing his velveteens, but a gray flannel suit that an earl need not have scorned, and his straw hat would have done no discredit to a duke, and a prince could not have worn a prettier green tie. He welcomed the children warmly, and there were 2 baskets dumped heavy and promising among the beech leaves. He was a man of tact. The hot, instructive tour of the stone antediluvians, which had loomed with ever-lessening charm before the children, was not even mentioned. "You must be desert dry," he said, "and you'll be hungry, too, when you've done being thirsty. I put on the kettle as soon as I discerned the form of my fair romancer in the extreme offing." The kettle introduced itself with puffings and bubblings from the hollow between 2 gray roots, where it sat on a spirit lamp. "Take off your shoes and stockings, won't you?" said the bailiff in matter-of-fact tones, just as old ladies ask each other to take off their bonnets. "There's a little baby canal just over the ridge." The joys of dipping one's feet in cool, running water after a hot walk have yet to be described. I could write pages about them. There was a mill stream when I was young, with little fishes in it, and dropped leaves that spun round, and willows and alders that leaned over it and kept it cool, but this is not the story of my life. When they came back on rested, damp, pink feet, tea was made and poured out. Delicious tea, with as much milk as ever you wanted, out of a beer bottle with a screw top, and cakes and gingerbread and plums, and a big melon with a lump of ice in its heart. A tea for the gods. This thought must have come to Jimmy, for he said suddenly, removing his face from inside a wide-bitten crescent of melon rind, "Your feast's as good as the feast of the immortals, almost." "Explain your recondite illusion," said the gray-flannelled host, and Jimmy, understanding him to say, "What do you mean?" replied with the whole tale of that wonderful night when the statues came alive, and a banquet of unearthly splendor and deliciousness was plucked by marble hands from the trees of the lake island. When he had done, the bailiff said, "Did you get all this out of a book?" "No," said Jimmy, "it happened." "You are an imaginative set of young dreamers, aren't you?" the bailiff asked, handing the plums to Kathleen, who smiled, friendly but embarrassed. Why couldn't Jimmy have held his tongue? "No, we're not," said that indiscreet one obstinately, everything I've told you did happen, and so did the things Mabel told you." The bailiff looked a little uncomfortable. "All right, old chap," he said, and there was a short, uneasy silence. "Look here," said Jimmy, who seemed for once to have got the bit between his teeth. "Do you believe me or not?"
"Don't be silly, Jimmy,"
Kathleen whispered. "Because if you don't, I'll make you believe."
"Don't,"
said Mabel and Kathleen together. "Do you or don't you?" Jimmy insisted, lying on his front with his chin on his hands, his elbows on a moss cushion, and his bare legs kicking among the beech leaves. "I think you tell adventures awfully well," said the bailiff cautiously. "Very well," said Jimmy, abruptly sitting up. "You don't believe me. Nonsense, Kathy. He's a gentleman, even if he is a bailiff." "Thank you," said the bailiff, with eyes that twinkled. "You won't tell, will you?" Jimmy urged. "Tell what?" "Anything." "Certainly not. I am, as you say, the soul of honor." "Then, Kathy, give me the ring."
"Oh, no!"
said the girls together. Kathleen did not mean to give up the ring. Mabel did not mean that she should. Jimmy certainly used no force, yet presently he held it in his hand. It was his hour. There are times like that for all of us, when what we say shall be done is done. "Now," said Jimmy, "this is the ring Mabel told you about. I say it is a wishing ring. And if you will put it on your hand and wish, whatever you wish will happen." "Must I wish out loud?" "Yes, I think so."
"Don't wish for anything silly,"
said Kathleen, making the best of the situation.
"like it's being fine on Tuesday, or it's being your favorite pudding for dinner tomorrow. Wish for something you really want."
"I will," said the bailiff. "I'll wish for the only thing I really want. I wish my friend were here." The three who knew the power of the ring looked round to see the bailiff's friend appear. A surprised man that friend would be, they thought, and perhaps a frightened one. They had all risen, and stood ready to soothe and reassure the newcomer. But no startled gentleman appeared in the wood, only, coming quietly through the dappled sun and shadow under the beech trees, Mademoiselle and Gerald. Mademoiselle in a white gown, looking quite nice and like a picture. Gerald hot and polite. "Good afternoon," said that dauntless leader of forlorn hopes. "I persuaded Mademoiselle—" That sentence was never finished, for the bailiff and the French governess were looking at each other with the eyes of tired travelers who find, quite without expecting it, the desired end of a very long journey. And the children saw that even if they spoke, it would not make any difference. "You," said the bailiff.
"Mais c'est donc faux,"
said Mademoiselle, in a funny, choky voice. And they stood still and looked at each other, like stuck pigs, as Jimmy said later, for quite a long time. "Is she your friend?" Jimmy asked. "Yes. Oh, yes," said the bailiff. "You are my friend, are you not?" "But yes," Mademoiselle said softly, "I am your friend." "There, you see," said Jimmy. "The ring does do what I said." "We won't quarrel about that," said the bailiff. "You can say it's the ring. For me, it's a coincidence. The happiest, the dearest." "Then you—" said the French governess. "Of course," said the bailiff. "Jimmy, give your brother some tea. Mademoiselle, come and walk in the woods. There are 1,000 things to say." Eat then, my Gerald, said Mademoiselle, now grown young, and astonishingly like a fairy princess. I return all at the hour, and we re-enter together. It is that we must speak each other. It is long time that we have not seen us, me and Lord Yalding.
So he was Lord Yalding all the time,
said Jimmy, breaking a stupefied silence as the white gown and the grey flannels disappeared among the beech trunks.
Landscape painter sort of dodge. Silly, I call it. And fancy herbing a friend of his, and his wishing she was here. Different from us, eh? Good old ring. His friend?
Said Mabel with strong scorn.
Don't you see? She's his lover. Don't you see? She's the lady that was bricked up in the convent because he was so poor and he couldn't find her. And now the rings made them live happy ever after. I am glad. Aren't you, Kathy? Rather,
said Kathleen.
It's as good as marrying a sailor or a bandit. It's the ring did it,
said Jimmy.
If the American takes the house, he'll pay lots of rent, and they can live on that. I wonder if they'll be married tomorrow,
said Mabel.
Wouldn't it be fun if we were bridesmaids?
Said Kathy.
May I trouble you for the melon?
Said Gerald.
Thanks. Why didn't we know he was Lord Yalding? Apes and moles that we were. I've known since last night, said Mabel calmly. Only I promised not to tell. I can keep a secret, can't I? Too jolly well,
said Kathleen, a little aggrieved.
He was disguised as a bailiff,
said Jimmy.
That's why we didn't know.
Disguised as a fiddlestick end, said Gerald.
Ha ha!
I see something old Sherlock Holmes never saw, nor that idiot Watson either. If you want a really impenetrable disguise, you ought to disguise yourself as what you really are. I'll remember that.
It's like Mabel, telling things so that you can't believe them,
said Kathy.
I think Mademoiselle's jolly lucky,
said Mabel. She's not so bad. He might have done worse, said Gerald. Plums, please. There was quite plainly magic at work. Mademoiselle next morning was a changed governess. Her cheeks were pink, her lips were red, her eyes were larger and brighter, and she had done her hair in an entirely new way, rather frivolous and very becoming.
Mamselle's coming out,
Eliza remarked. Immediately after breakfast, Lord Yalding called, with a wagonette that wore a smart blue cloth coat, and was drawn by 2 horses, whose coats were brown and shining, and fitted them even better than the blue cloth coat fitted the wagonette, and the whole party drove in state and splendor to Yalding Towers. Arrived there, the children clamored for permission to explore the castle thoroughly, a thing that had never yet been possible. Lord Yalding, a little absent in manner, but yet quite cordial, consented. Mabel showed the others all the secret doors and unlikely passages and stairs that she had discovered. It was a glorious morning. Lord Yalding and Mademoiselle went through the house, it is true, but in a rather half-hearted way. Quite soon they were tired, and went out through the French windows of the drawing-room and through the rose garden to sit on the curved stone seat in the middle of the maze, where once, at the beginning of things, Gerald, Kathleen, and Jimmy had found the sleeping princess who wore pink silk and diamonds. The children felt that their going left to the castle a more spacious freedom, and explored with more than Arctic enthusiasm. It was as they emerged from the little rickety secret staircase that led from the powdering room of the state suite to the gallery of the hall that they came suddenly face to face with the odd little man who had a beard like a goat and had taken the wrong turning yesterday.
"This part of the castle is private,"
said Mabel, with great presence of mind, and shut the door behind her. "I am aware of it," said the goat-faced stranger, "but I have the permission of the Earl of Yalding to examine the house at my leisure." "Oh," said Mabel, "I beg your pardon. We all do. We didn't know." "You are relatives of his lordship, I should surmise?" asked the goat-faced. "Not exactly," said Gerald. "Friends." The gentleman was thin and very neatly dressed. He had small, merry eyes, and a face that was brown and dry-looking. "You are playing some game, I should suppose?" "No, sir," said Gerald, "only exploring." "May a stranger propose himself as a member of your exploring expedition?" asked the gentleman, smiling a tight but kind smile. The children looked at each other. "You see," said Gerald, "it's rather difficult to explain, but you see what I mean, don't you?" "He means," said Jimmy, "that we can't take you into an exploring party without we know what you want to go for." "Are you a photographer?" asked Mabel, "or is it some newspaper sent you to write about the towers?" "I understand your position," said the gentleman. "I am not a photographer, nor am I engaged by any journal. I am a man of independent means, traveling in this country with the intention of renting a residence. My name is Jefferson D. Conway." "Oh," said Mabel, "then you're the American millionaire." "I do not like the description, young lady," said Mr. Jefferson D. Conway. "I am an American citizen, and I am not without means. This is a fine property, a very fine property. If it were for sale—" "It isn't. It can't be," Mabel hastened to explain. "The lawyers have put it in a tale, so Lord Yalding can't sell it. But you could take it to live in and pay Lord Yalding a good millionaire-ish rent, and then he could marry the French governess—" "Shh!" said Kathleen and Mr. Jefferson D. Conway together. And he added, "Lead the way, please, and I should suggest that the exploration be complete and exhaustive." Thus encouraged, Mabel led the millionaire through all the castle. He seemed pleased, yet disappointed too. "It is a fine mansion," he said at last, when they had come back to the point from which they had started. "But I should suppose in a house this size there would mostly be a secret stairway, or a priest's hiding place, or a ghost." "There are," said Mabel briefly, "but I thought Americans didn't believe in anything but machinery and newspapers." She touched the spring of the panel behind her, and displayed the little tottery staircase to the American. The sight of it worked a wonderful transformation in him. He became eager, alert, very keen. "Say!" he cried, over and over again, standing in the door that led from the powdering room to the state bedchamber. "But this is great! Great!" The hopes of everyone ran high. It seemed almost certain that the castle would be let for a millionaire-ish rent, and Lord Yalding be made affluent to the point of marriage. "If there were a ghost located in this ancestral pile, I'd close with the Earl of Yalding today. Now, on the nail," Mr. Jefferson D. Conway went on. "If you were to stay till tomorrow and sleep in this room, I expect you'd see the ghost," said Mabel. "There is a ghost located here, then?" he said joyously. "They say," Mabel answered, "that old Sir Rupert, who lost his head in Henry VIII's time, walks of a night here with his head under his arm. But we've not seen that. What we have seen is the lady in a pink dress with diamonds in her hair. She carries a lighted taper," Mabel hastily added. The others, now suddenly aware of Mabel's plan, hastened to assure the American, in accents of earnest truth, that they had all seen the lady with the pink gown. He looked at them with half-closed eyes that twinkled. "Well," he said,
I calculate to ask the Earl of Yalding to permit me to pass a night in his ancestral best bedchamber. And if I hear so much as a phantom footstep, or hear so much as a ghostly sigh, I'll take the place." "I am glad," said Kathy. "You appear to be very certain of your ghost," said the American, still fixing them with little eyes that shone. "Let me tell you, young gentleman, that I carry a gun, and when I see a ghost, I shoot." He pulled a pistol out of his hip pocket and looked at it lovingly. "And I am a fair average shot," he went on, walking across the shiny floor of the state bedchamber to the open window. "See that big red rose, like a tea saucer?" They saw. The next moment, a loud report broke the stillness, and the red petals of the shattered rose strewed balustrade and terrace. The American looked from one child to another. Every face was perfectly white. "Jefferson D. Conway made his little pile by strict attention to business and keeping his eyes skinned," he added. "Thank you for all your kindness." "Suppose you'd done it and he'd shot you," said Jimmy cheerfully. "That would have been an adventure, wouldn't it?" "I'm going to do it still," said Mabel, pale and defiant. "Let's find Lord Yalding and get the ring back." Lord Yalding had had an interview with Mabel's aunt, and lunch for 6 was laid in the great dark hall, among the armor and the oak furniture. A beautiful lunch, served on silver dishes. Mademoiselle, becoming every moment younger and more like a princess, was moved to tears when Gerald rose, lemonade glass in hand, and proposed the health of Lord and Lady Yalding. When Lord Yalding had returned thanks in a speech full of agreeable jokes, the moment seemed to Gerald propitious, and he said, "The ring, you know, you don't believe in it, but we do. May we have it back?" And got it. Then, after a hasty council, held in the paneled jewel room, Mabel said, "This is a wishing ring, and I wish all the Americans' weapons of all sorts were here." Instantly, the room was full, 6 feet up the wall, of a tangle and mass of weapons. Swords, spears, arrows, tomahawks, fowling pieces, blunderbusses, pistols, revolvers, scimitars, creases, every kind of weapon you can think of. And the 4 children, wedged in among all these weapons of death, hardly dared to breathe. "He collects arms, I expect," said Gerald, "and the arrows are poisoned, I shouldn't wonder. Wish them back where they came from, Mabel, for goodness sake, and try again." Mabel wished the weapons away, and at once the 4 children stood safe in a bare-paneled room. But, "No," Mabel said, "I can't stand it. We'll work the ghost another way. I wish the American may think he sees a ghost when he goes to bed. Sir Rupert with his head under his arm will do." "Is it tonight he sleeps there?" "I don't know. I wish he may see Sir Rupert every night. That'll make it all serene." "It's rather dull," said Gerald. "We shan't know whether he's seen Sir Rupert or not." "We shall know in the morning, when he takes the house." This being settled, Mabel's aunt was found to be desirous of Mabel's company, so the others went home. It was when they were at supper that Lord Yalding suddenly appeared, and said, "Mr. Jefferson Conway wants you boys to spend the night with him in the state chamber. I've had beds put up. You don't mind, do you? He seems to think you've got some idea of playing ghost tricks on him." It was difficult to refuse, so difficult that it proved impossible. 10 o'clock found the boys each in a narrow white bed that looked quite absurdly small in that high dark chamber, and in face of that tall gaunt 4-poster, hung with tapestry and ornamented with funereal-looking plumes. "I hope to goodness there isn't a real ghost,"
Jimmy whispered.
Not likely,
Gerald whispered back.
but I don't want to see Sir Rupert's ghost with its head under its arm,
Jimmy insisted.
You won't. The most you'll see'll be the millionaire seeing it. Mabel said he was to see it, not us. Very likely you'll sleep all night and not see anything. Shut your eyes and count up to 1,000,000, and don't be a goat.
But he was reckoning without Mabel and the ring. As soon as Mabel had learned from her drab-haired aunt that this was indeed the night when Mr. Jefferson D. Conway would sleep at the castle, she had hastened to add a wish.
That Sir Rupert and his head may appear tonight in the state bedroom.
Jimmy shut his eyes and began to count 1,000,000. Before he had counted it, he fell asleep. So did his brother. They were awakened by the loud echoing bang of a pistol shot. Each thought of the shot that had been fired that morning, and opened eyes that expected to see a sunshiny terrace and red rose petals strewn upon warm white stone. Instead, there was the dark, lofty state chamber, lighted but little by 6 tall candles. There was the American in shirt and trousers, a smoking pistol in his hand. And there, advancing from the door of the powdering room, a figure in doublet and hose, a ruff round its neck, and no head. The head, sure enough, was there, but it was under the right arm, held close in the slashed velvet sleeve of the doublet. The face looking from under the arm wore a pleasant smile. Both boys, I am sorry to say, screamed. The American fired again. The bullet passed through Sir Rupert, who advanced without appearing to notice it. Then, suddenly, the lights went out. The next thing the boys knew, it was morning. A gray daylight shone blankly through the tall windows, and wild rain was beating upon the glass, and the American was gone.
Where are we?
Said Jimmy, sitting up with tangled hair and looking round him.
Oh, I remember. Ugh, it was horrid. I'm about fed up with that ring, so I don't mind telling you.
Nonsense, said Gerald. I enjoyed it. I wasn't a bit frightened. Were you?
No, said Jimmy. Of course I wasn't.
We've done the trick, said Gerald later, when they learned that the American had breakfasted early with Lord Yalding and taken the first train to London. He's gone to get rid of his other house and take this one. The old ring's beginning to do really useful things.
Perhaps you'll believe in the ring now,
said Jimmy to Lord Yalding, whom he met later on in the picture gallery.
It's all our doing that Mr. Jefferson saw the ghost. He told us he'd take the house if he saw a ghost, so of course we took care he did see one.
Oh, you did you? Said Lord Yalding, in rather an odd voice. I'm very much obliged, I'm sure.
Don't mention it, said Jimmy kindly. I thought you'd be pleased, and him too.
Perhaps you'll be interested to learn, said Lord Yalding, putting his hands in his pockets and staring down at Jimmy, that Mr. Jefferson D. Conway was so pleased with your ghost that he got me out of bed at 6 o'clock this morning to talk about it.
Oh, ripping, said Jimmy. What did he say?
He said, as far as I can remember, said Lord Yalding, still in the same strange voice, he said, My lord, your ancestral pile is A1. It is, in fact, the limit. Its luxury is palatial. Its grounds are nothing short of Edenesque. No expense has been spared, I should surmise. Your ancestors were whole hoggers. They have done the thing as it should be done, every detail attended to. I like your tapestry, and I like your oak, and I like your secret stairs. But I think your ancestors should have left well enough alone and stopped at that. So I said they had, as far as I knew, and he shook his head and said, No, sir, Your ancestors take the air of a night with their heads under their arms. A ghost that sighed or glided or rustled I could have stood, and thanked you for it, and considered it in the rent. But a ghost that bullets go through while it stands grinning with a bare neck, and his head loose under his own arm, and little boys screaming and fainting in their beds. No, what I say is, if this is a British hereditary high-toned family ghost, excuse me. And he went off by the early train.
I say,
the stricken Jimmy remarked,
I am sorry, and I don't think we did faint, really I don't. But we thought it would be just what you wanted, and perhaps someone else will take the house.
I don't know anyone else rich enough, said Lord Yalding. Mr. Conway came the day before he said he would, or you'd never have got hold of him. And I don't know how you did it, and I don't want to know. It was a rather silly trick. There was a gloomy pause. The rain beat against the long windows.
I say,
Jimmy looked up at Lord Yalding, with the light of a new idea in his round face.
I say, if you're hard up, why don't you sell your jewels?
I haven't any jewels, you meddlesome young duffer, said Lord Yalding quite crossly. And taking his hands out of his pockets, he began to walk away.
I mean the ones in the paneled room, with the stars in the ceiling,
Jimmy insisted, following him. There aren't any, said Lord Yalding shortly. And if this is some more ring nonsense, I advise you to be careful, young man. I've had about as much as I care for.
It's not ring nonsense,
said Jimmy.
There are shelves and shelves of beautiful family jewels. You can sell them, and... Oh, no!
cried Mademoiselle, appearing like an oleograph of a duchess in the door of the picture gallery.
Don't sell the family jewels.
There aren't any, my lady, said Lord Yalding, going towards her. I thought you were never coming.
Oh, aren't there?
said Mabel, who had followed Mademoiselle.
You just come and see. Let us see what they will to show us,
cried Mademoiselle, for Lord Yalding did not move.
It should at least be amusing. It is,
said Jimmy. So they went, Mabel and Jimmy leading, while Mademoiselle and Lord Yalding followed, hand in hand. It's much safer to walk hand in hand, said Lord Yalding. With these children at large, one never knows what may happen next. End of chapter 11. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to find out how you can volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Enchanted Castle by E. Nesbit. Recorded by Peter Eastman. Chapter 12. It would be interesting, no doubt, to describe the feelings of Lord Yalding as he followed Mabel and Jimmy through his ancestral halls. But I have no means of knowing at all what he felt. Yet one must suppose that he felt something. Bewilderment, perhaps, mixed with a faint wonder, and a desire to pinch himself to see if he were dreaming. Or he may have pondered the rival questions. Am I mad? Are they mad? Without being at all able to decide which he ought to try to answer, let alone deciding what, in either case, the answer ought to be. You see, the children did seem to believe in the odd stories they told, and the wish had come true, and the ghost had appeared. He must have thought, but all this is vain. I don't really know what he thought any more than you do. Nor can I give you any clue to the thoughts and feelings of Mademoiselle. I only know that she was very happy, but anyone would have known that if they had seen her face. Perhaps this is as good a moment as any to explain that when her guardian had put her in a convent so that she should not sacrifice her fortune by marrying a poor lord, her guardian had secured that fortune to himself by going off with it to South America. Then, having no money left, Mademoiselle had to work for it. So she went out as governess, and took the situation she did take because it was near Lord Yalding's home. She wanted to see him, even though she thought he had forsaken her and did not love her any more. And now she had seen him. I dare say she thought about some of these things as she went along through his house, her hand held in his. But of course I can't be sure. Jimmy's thoughts, of course, I can read like any old book. He thought, "Now he'll have to believe me." That Lord Yalding should believe him had become, quite unreasonably, the most important thing in the world to Jimmy. He wished that Gerald and Kathleen were there to share his triumph, but they were helping Mabel's aunt to cover the grand furniture up, and so were out of what followed. Not that they missed much, for when Mabel proudly said, "Now you'll see," and the others came close round her in the little panelled room, there was a pause, and then nothing happened at all.
"There's a secret spring here somewhere,"
said Mabel, fumbling with fingers that had suddenly grown hot and damp. "Where?" said Lord Yalding.
"Here,"
said Mabel impatiently,
"only I can't find it."
And she couldn't. She found the spring of the secret panel under the window all right, but that seemed to everyone dull, compared with the jewels that everyone had pictured, and two at least had seen. But the spring that made the oak paneling slide away, and displayed jewels plainly to any eye worth a king's ransom, this could not be found. More, it was simply not there. There could be no doubt of that. Every inch of the paneling was felt by careful fingers. The earnest protests of Mabel and Jimmy died away presently, in a silence made painful by the hotness of one's ears, the discomfort of not liking to meet anyone's eyes, and the resentful feeling that the spring was not behaving in at all a sportsmanlike way, and that, in a word, this was not cricket. "You see," said Lord Yalding severely, "now you've had your joke, if you call it a joke, and I've had enough of the whole silly business. Give me the ring. It's mine, I suppose, since you say you found it somewhere here. And don't let's hear another word about all this rubbish of magic and enchantments."
"Gerald's got the ring,"
said Mabel miserably. "Then go and fetch him," said Lord Yalding, "both of you." The melancholy pair retired, and Lord Yalding spent the time of their absence in explaining to Mademoiselle how very unimportant jewels were compared with other things. The four children came back together. "We've had enough of this ring business," said Lord Yalding. "Give it to me, and we'll say no more about it." I can't get it off," said Gerald. It always did have a will of its own." "I'll soon get it off," said Lord Yalding. But he didn't. "We'll try soap," he said firmly. 4 out of his 5 hearers knew just exactly how much use soap would be.
"They won't believe about the jewels,"
wailed Mabel, suddenly dissolved in tears.
"And I can't find the spring. I felt all over. We all have. It was just here, and—"
Her fingers felt it as she spoke, and as she ceased to speak, the carved panels slid away, and the blue velvet shelves laden with jewels were disclosed to the unbelieving eyes of Lord Yalding and the lady who was to be his wife. "Jove!" said Lord Yalding.
Misericordia,
said the lady.
but why now?
Gasped Mabel.
Why not before?
I expect it's magic, said Gerald. There's no real spring here, and it couldn't act because the ring wasn't here. You know Phoebus told us the ring was the heart of all the magic.
Shut it up and take the ring away and see.
They did, and Gerald was, as usual, he himself pointed out, proved to be right. When the ring was away, there was no spring. When the ring was in the room, there, as Mabel urged, was the spring, all right enough.
So you see,
said Mabel to Lord Yalding.
I see that the spring's very artfully concealed,
said that dense peer.
I think it was very clever indeed of you to find it, and if those jewels are real— Of course they're real,
said Mabel indignantly.
Well, anyway,
said Lord Yalding,
thank you all very much. I think it's clearing up. I'll send the wagonette home with you after lunch, and if you don't mind, I'll have the ring.
Half an hour of soap and water produced no effect whatever, except to make the finger of Gerald very red and very sore. Then Lord Yalding said something very impatient indeed, and then Gerald suddenly became angry and said, "Well, I'm sure I wish it would come off." And, of course, instantly, slick as butter, as he later pointed out, off it came.
"Thank you,"
said Lord Yalding.
"And I believe now he thinks I kept it on purpose,"
said Gerald afterwards, when, at ease on the leads at home, they talked the whole thing out over a tin of preserved pineapple and a bottle of ginger beer apiece. There's no pleasing some people. He wasn't in such a fiery hurry to order that wagonette after he found that Mademoiselle meant to go when we did, but I liked him better when he was a humble bailiff. Take him for all in all, he does not look as if we should like him again.
"He doesn't know what's the matter with him,"
said Kathleen, leaning back against the tiled roof.
"It's really the magic. It's like sickening with measles. Do you remember how cross Mabel was at first about the invisibleness?"
"Rather," said Jimmy. "It's partly that," said Gerald, trying to be fair, "and partly it's the being in love. It always makes people like idiots. A chap at school told me. His sister was like that. Quite rotten, you know, and she used to be quite a decent sort before she was engaged." At tea and at supper, Mademoiselle was radiant, as attractive as a lady on a Christmas card, as merry as a marmoset, and as kind as you would always be yourself, if you could take the trouble. At breakfast, an equal radiance, kindness, attraction, merriment. Then Lord Yalding came to see her. The meeting took place in the drawing-room. The children, with deep discreetness, remained shut in the schoolroom, till Gerald, going up to his room for a pencil, surprised Eliza with her ear glued to the drawing-room keyhole. After that, Gerald sat on the top stair with a book. He could not hear any of the conversation in the drawing-room, but he could command a view of the door, and in this way be certain that no one else heard any of it. Thus it was that when the drawing-room door opened, Gerald was in a position to see Lord Yalding come out. Our young hero, as he said later, coughed with infinite tact to show that he was there. But Lord Yalding did not seem to notice. He walked in a blind sort of way to the hat-stand, fumbled clumsily with the umbrellas and mackintoshes, found his straw hat and looked at it gloomily, crammed it on his head, and went out, banging the door behind him in the most reckless way. He left the drawing-room door open, and Gerald, though he had purposely put himself in a position where one could hear nothing from the drawing-room when the door was shut, could hear something quite plainly now that the door was open. That something, he noticed with deep distress and disgust, was the sound of sobs and sniffs. Mademoiselle was quite certainly crying. "Jiminy," he remarked to himself. They haven't lost much time. Fancy they're beginning to quarrel already. I hope I'll never have to be anybody's lover. But this was no time to brood on the terrors of his own future. Eliza might at any time occur. She would not for a moment hesitate to go through that open door and push herself into the very secret, sacred heart of Mademoiselle's grief. It seemed to Gerald better that he should be the one to do this. So he went softly down the worn green Dutch carpet of the stairs and into the drawing-room, shutting the door softly and securely behind him.
"It is all over,"
Mademoiselle was saying, her face buried in the beady arum lilies on a red ground, worked for a cushion cover by a former pupil.
"He will not marry me."
Do not ask me how Gerald had gained the lady's confidence. He had, as I think I said almost at the beginning, very pretty ways with grown-ups when he chose. Anyway, he was holding her hand, almost as affectionately as if she had been his mother with a headache, and saying, "Don't," and "Don't cry," and "It'll be all right, you see if it isn't," in the most comforting way you can imagine, varying the treatment with gentle thumps on the back and entreaties to her to tell him all about it. This wasn't mere curiosity, as you might think. The entreaties were prompted by Gerald's growing certainty that whatever was the matter was somehow the fault of that ring. And in this Gerald was, once more, as he told himself, right. The tale, as told by Mademoiselle, was certainly an unusual one. Lord Yalding, last night after dinner, had walked in the park. "To think of? Yes, I know," said Gerald, "and he had the ring on, and he saw—"
"He saw the monuments become alive,"
sobbed Mademoiselle.
"His brain was troubled by the ridiculous accounts of fairies that you tell him. He sees Apollon and Aphrodite alive on their marble. He remembers him of your story. He wishes himself a statue. Then he becomes mad, imagines to himself that your story of the island is true, plunges in the lake, swims among the beasts of the Ark of Noé, feeds with gods on an island. At dawn, the madness become less. He think the Pantheon vanish. But him, no. He thinks himself statue, hiding from gardeners in his garden till 9 less a quarter. Then he thinks to wish himself no more a statue, and perceives that he is flesh and blood. A bad dream, but he has lost the head with the tales you tell. He say it is no dream, but he is fool, mad, how you say, and a madman must not marry. There is no hope. I am at despair, and the life is vain."
"There is," said Gerald earnestly. "I assure you there is. Hope, I mean. And life's as right as rain, really. And there's nothing to despair about. He's not mad, and it's not a dream. It's magic. It really and truly is."
"The magic exists not,"
Mademoiselle moaned.
"It is that he is mad. It is the joy to re-see me after so many days. Oh, la 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 la."
"Did he talk to the gods?" Gerald asked gently.
"It is there the most mad of all his ideas. He say that Mercure give him rendezvous at some temple tomorrow when the moon raise herself."
"Right," cried Gerald. "Righto. Dear, nice, kind, pretty Mademoiselle Rapunzel, don't be a silly little duffer." He lost himself for a moment among the consoling endearments he was accustomed to offer to Kathleen in moments of grief and emotion, but hastily added, "I mean, do not be a lady who weeps causelessly. Tomorrow he will go to that temple. I will go. Thou shalt go. He will go. We will go. You will go. Let 'em all go. And, you see, it's going to be absolutely all right. He'll see he isn't mad, and you'll understand all about everything. Take my handkerchief. It's quite a clean one, as it happens. I haven't even unfolded it. Oh, do stop crying. There's a dear, darling, long-lost lover." This flood of eloquence was not without effect. She took his handkerchief, sobbed, half-smiled, dabbed at her eyes, and said,
"Oh, naughty! Is it some trick you play him, like the ghost?"
"I can't explain," said Gerald, "but I give you my word of honor. You know what an Englishman's word of honor is, don't you, even if you are French? That everything is going to be exactly what you wish. I've never told you a lie. Believe me."
"It is curious,"
said she, drying her eyes,
"but I do."
And once again, so suddenly that he could not have resisted, she kissed him. I think, however, that in this her hour of sorrow, he would have thought it mean to resist. "It pleases her, and it doesn't hurt me much," would have been his thought. And now it is near moonrise. The French governess, half doubting, half hoping, but wholly longing to be near Lord Yalding, even if he be as mad as a March hare, and the 4 children. They have collected Mabel by an urgent letter card posted the day before, are going over the dewy grass. The moon has not yet risen, but her light is in the sky, mixed with the pink and purple of the sunset. The west is heavy with ink clouds and rich color, but the east, where the moon rises, is clear as a rock pool. They go across the lawn and through the beechwood, and come at last, through a tangle of underwood and bramble, to a little level tableland that rises out of the flat hilltop, one tableland out of another. Here is the ring of vast rugged stones, one pierced with a curious round hole, worn smooth at its edges. In the middle of the circle is a great flat stone, alone, desolate, full of meaning. A stone that is covered thick with the memory of old faiths and creeds long since forgotten. Something dark moves in the circle. The French girl breaks from the children, goes to it, clings to its arm. It is Lord Yalding, and he is telling her to go.
"Never of the life," she cries. "If you are mad, I am mad too, for I believe the tale these children tell. And I am here to be with thee and see with thee, whatever the rising moon shall show us."
The children, holding hands by the flat stone, more moved by the magic in the girl's voice than by any magic of enchanted rings, listen, trying not to listen. "Are you not afraid?" Lord Yalding is saying.
"Afraid? With you?"
She laughs. He put his arm round her. The children hear her sigh. "Are you afraid?" he says, "my darling?" Gerald goes across the wide turf ring expressly to say, "You can't be afraid if you are wearing the ring, and I'm sorry, but we can hear every word you say." She laughs again.
"It makes nothing," she says. "You know already if we love each other."
Then he puts the ring on her finger, and they stand together. The white of his flannel coat sleeve marks no line on the white of her dress. They stand as though cut out of one block of marble. Then a faint grayness touches the top of that round hole, creeps up the side. Then the hole is a disk of light. A moonbeam strikes straight through it, across the gray-green of the circle that the stones mark. And as the moon rises, the moonbeam slants downward. The children have drawn back till they stand close to the lovers. The moonbeam slants more and more. Now it touches the far end of the stone, Now it draws nearer and nearer to the middle of it. Now, at last, it touches the very heart and center of that central stone. And then, it is as though a spring were touched, a fountain of light released. Everything changes. Or rather, everything is revealed. There are no more secrets. The plan of the world seems plain, like an easy sum that one writes in big figures on a child's slate. One wonders how one can ever have wondered about anything. Space is not. Every place that one has seen or dreamed of is here. Time is not. Into this instant is crowded all that one has ever done or dreamed of doing. It is a moment, and it is eternity. It is the center of the universe, and it is the universe itself. The eternal light rests on and illuminates the eternal heart of things. None of the 6 human beings who saw that moon rising were ever able to think about it as having anything to do with time. Only for one instant could that moon ray have rested full on the center of that stone. And yet there was time for many happenings. From that height, one could see far out over the quiet park and sleeping gardens, and through the gray-green of them, shapes moved, approaching. The great beasts came first, strange forms that were when the world was new. Gigantic lizards with wings. Dragons they lived as in men's memories. Mammoths, strange, vast birds, they crawled up the hill and ranged themselves outside the circle. Then, not from the garden, but from very far away, came the stone gods of Egypt and Assyria, bull-bodied, bird-winged, hawk-headed, cat-headed, all in stone, and all alive and alert. Strange, grotesque figures from the towers of cathedrals, figures of angels with folded wings, figures of beasts with wings wide spread, sphinxes, uncouth idols from southern palm-fringed islands, and last of all, the beautiful marble shapes of the gods and goddesses who had held their festival on the lake island and bidden Lord Yalding and the children to this meeting. Not a word was spoken. Each stone shape came gladly and quietly into the circle of light and understanding, as children, tired with a long ramble, creep quietly through the open door into the firelit welcome of home. The children had thought to ask many questions, and it had been promised that the questions should be answered. Yet now, no one spoke a word, because all had come into the circle of the real magic, where all things are understood without speech. Afterwards, none of them could ever remember at all what had happened, but they never forgot that they had been somewhere where everything was easy and beautiful. And people who can remember even that much are never quite the same again. And when they came to talk of it next day, they found that to each some little part of that night's great enlightenment was left. All the stone creatures drew closer round the stone. The light where the moonbeam struck it seemed to break away in spray, such as water makes when it falls from a height. All the crowd was bathed in whiteness. A deep hush lay over the vast assembly. Then a wave of intention swept over the mighty crowd. All the faces, bird, beast, Greek statue, Babylonian monster, human child and human lover, turned upward. The radiant light illumined them, and one word broke from all. "The light!" they cried, and the sound of their voice was like the sound of a great wave. "The light! The light!" And then the light was not any more, and soft as floating thistledown, sleep was laid on the eyes of all but the immortals. The grass was chill and dewy, and the clouds had veiled the moon. The lovers and the children were standing together, all clinging close, not for fear, but for love. "I want," said the French girl softly, "to go to the cave on the island." Very quietly, through the gentle brooding night, they went down to the boathouse, loosed the clanking chain, and dipped oars among the drowned stars and lilies. They came to the island, and found the steps. "I brought candles," said Gerald, "in case." So, lighted by Gerald's candles, they went down into the hall of Psyche, and there glowed the light spread from her statue, and all was as the children had seen it before. It is the Hall of Granted Wishes. "The ring," said Lord Yalding. "The ring," said his lover, "is the magic ring given long ago to a mortal, and it is what you say it is. It was given to your ancestor by a lady of my house, that he might build her a garden and a house, like her own palace and garden in her own land, so that this place is built partly by his love, and partly by that magic. She never lived to see it. That was the price of the magic." It must have been English that she spoke, for otherwise how could the children have understood her? Yet the words were not like Mademoiselle's way of speaking. "Except from children," her voice went on, "the ring exacts a payment. You paid for me when I came by your wish, by this terror of madness that you have since known. Only one wish is free." "And that wish is?" "The last," she said. "Shall I wish?" "Yes, wish," they said, all of them. "I wish, then," said Lord Yalding's lover, "that all the magic this ring has wrought may be undone, and that the ring itself may be no more and no less than a charm to bind thee and me together for evermore." She ceased, and as she ceased, the enchanted light died away. The windows of granted wishes went out like magic lantern pictures. Gerald's candle faintly lighted a rudely arched cave, and where Psyche's statue had been was a stone with something carved on it. Gerald held the light low. "It is her grave," the girl said. Next day, no one could remember anything at all exactly, but a good many things were changed. There was no ring, but the plain gold ring that Mademoiselle found clasped in her hand when she woke in her own bed in the morning. More than half the jewels in the paneled room were gone, and those that remained had no paneling to cover them. They just lay bare on the velvet-covered shelves. There was no passage at the back of the Temple of Flora. Quite a lot of the secret passages and hidden rooms had disappeared, and there were not nearly so many statues in the garden as everyone had supposed, and large pieces of the castle were missing and had to be replaced at great expense. From which we may conclude that Lord Yalding's ancestor had used the ring a good deal to help him in his building. However, the jewels that were left were quite enough to pay for everything. The suddenness with which all the ring magic was undone was such a shock to everyone concerned that they now almost doubt that any magic ever happened. But it is certain that Lord Yalding married the French governess, and that a plain gold ring was used in the ceremony. And this, if you come to think of it, could be no other than the magic ring, turned by that last wish into a charm to keep him and his wife together forever. Also, if all this story is nonsense and a make-up, if Gerald and Jimmy and Kathleen and Mabel have merely imposed on my trusting nature by a pack of unlikely inventions, how do you account for the paragraph which appeared in the evening papers the day after the magic of the moon rising? Mysterious disappearance of a well-known city man, it said, and then went on to say how a gentleman, well-known and much respected in financial circles, had vanished, leaving no trace. Mr. U.W. Ugly, the papers continued, had remained late, working at his office as was his occasional habit. The office door was found locked, and on its being broken open, the clothes of the unfortunate gentleman were found in a heap on the floor, together with an umbrella, a walking stick, a golf club, and, curiously enough, a feather brush, such as housemaids use for dusting. Of his body, however, there was no trace. The police are stated to have a clue. If they have kept it to themselves. But I do not think that they can have a clue, because, of course, that respected gentleman was the Ugly Wuggly, who became real when, in search of a really good hotel, he got into the Hall of Granted Wishes. And if none of this story ever happened, how is it that those 4 children are such friends with Lord and Lady Yalding, and stay at the Towers almost every holidays? It is all very well for all of them to pretend that the whole of the story is my own invention. Facts are facts, and you can't explain them away. End of The Enchanted Castle by E. Nesbit. Recorded by Peter Eastman.